Chapter 1739. The weak point of the formation is not fixed. Instead, it can change at any time as the formation operates. All of you, prepare yourselves and listen to my command, said Fairy Haoyue. Jianqin, Shenjian and Fu, Mo Ling, and the elders all prepared themselves. They all stood in their respective positions, secretly accumulating power so that they could unleash their most powerful attack at any time. Jianqin and Shenjian also radiated with powerful sword intent. As the two of them stood there, they seemed to have turned into two divine swords with astonishing might. The space was filled with a powerful sword intent that infected the air, causing it to become sharp. The two of them understood that they were facing a formation cast down by an overgod. The formation was so powerful that even regular overgods would struggle to get through it, let alone people like them who are only gods. As a result, they would use their full strength this time. 3 meters to the left. Now, do it! Fairy Haoyue called out coldly. With that, everyone struck out at the same time. They all launched their most powerful attacks towards the location Fairy Haoyue had indicated. 2 streaks of light shone extremely brightly among the attacks. They illuminated the entire dwelling, completely drowning out Mo Ling and Ando Fu's light. Boom! The attacks from Jianqin, Shenjian, Ando Fu, Mo Ling, and the elders basically struck the location Fairy Haoyue had indicated at the same time. With a great boom, powerful ripples of energy blasted back, pushing the elders back. They struggled to remain where they were before such ferocious ripples of energy. The formation immediately began to flicker. Jianqin, Shenjian, and the others all stared at the formation. But to their disappointment, the formation only trembled slightly before stabilizing after enduring their powerful attacks. Your attacks are too weak. If that's all you have, let alone entering Duanmu's cultivation grounds, you won't even be able to obtain what Duanmu's disciple has left behind, Fairy Haoyue said with a frown. Use your battle skills again. Deities fall into formation, said Jianqin. Afterwards, the deities of the Mo clan and Ando clan all fell into formation. Mo Ling and Ando Fu were prepared to use their battle skills as well. 3 feet to the left. Do it! Fairy Haoyue's voice rang out. Daluo sword. A will that splits the heavens, sword shakes, stars shatter. Jianqin and Shenjian immediately struck out. They used powerful sword techniques, while Mo Ling and Ando Fu used their truth tier battle skills at the same time. As for the deities of the 2 clans, they used their most powerful attacks through the formation. Boom! With a great boom, the attacks this time were clearly much more powerful than before. The formation immediately began to tremble as it flickered rapidly. However, the formation remained unscathed after enduring everyone's attacks. Fairy Haoyue shook her head gently and sighed gently. This is only equivalent to an attack from a peak god. It's still very far away from an overgod. The main reason why the attacks could reach the level of a peak god was because of Jianqin and Shenjian. As for Mo Ling and Ando Fu, they were only early gods. Even if they used truth tier battle skills, they would only reach the level of a mid-god at most. As for the deities, even if they combined their powers through the formation, the effects would still be insignificant. It was basically negligible. It was only better than nothing. Again, Jianqin's eyes turned cold as he said coldly. With that, a terrifying sword intent that made everyone present shiver permeated the surroundings. A finger-sized strand of sword qi hovered above Jianqin's head. Mo Ling and Ando Fu's eyes narrowed as shock flooded their faces. As soon as the strand of sword qi appeared, they felt chills run down their bodies, as if they had fallen into an icy cavern of death. Even their hands and feet shivered. Terrifying. It was just too terrifying. This was what Mo Ling and Ando Fu felt from the sword qi. It caused them to feel a sliver of fear uncontrollably. Shenjian's eyes narrowed as well. He stared at the tiny sword Qi above Jianshin's head. This was the second time he had seen Jianshin use the sword Qi, but it was much more powerful than the first time. Not to mention early heavenly gods. Even mid-heavenly gods would have to die before this sword Qi. Even late heavenly gods would be killed. This was because the sword Qi was just far too powerful. Fairy Haoyue could not help but glance at Jianshin again. A sliver of eagerness appeared in her eyes, right at the center. Attack! Everyone attacked as hard as they could once again. They used their most powerful battle skills and sword techniques, while the profound sword Qi above Jianshin's head shot out as a white streak of light. Boom! This time, the formation was finally shaken up. It began to shake violently as it flickered and dimmed. However, it was still quite far from shattering. Jianshin's eyes turned cold when he saw this. With a thought, another tiny strand of sword Qi hovered above his head, radiating with a surging presence. The second strand of sword Qi was even more powerful than the first. Swish! Before the formation could stabilize, the second strand of sword Qi turned into a streak of light, striking the trembling formation with lightning-like speed. With a boom, the formation that even regular overgods would struggle to smash through finally cracked before Jianshin's 2 strands of profound sword Qi. It shattered. It's broken. It's broken. The formation's broken. Mo Ling and Ando Fu beamed. They were both extremely excited. The two of them had coveted this dwelling for a very long time. Tsang Jin had come here several times with their ancestor. With their ancestor's strength as an overgod, it would not be difficult for him to get through the formations. He would just need to expend a great deal of effort. However, it was exactly because their ancestor was unwilling to waste his energy on a dwelling that was not attractive to them that he did not smash through the formation. He placed all of his efforts on the divine King Duanmu's legacy, so he could only allow the dwelling to lie there quietly until today. Behind them, the deities of the Mo clan and the Ando clan became excited as well. However, Jianshin, the person who had contributed the most to smashing through the formation, was pale and haggard. He seemed weak. Using the profound sword Qi was just far too taxing on him. He could still withstand a single strand of profound sword Qi with his way of the sword at the great perfection of sword origin, but using 2 strands of profound sword Qi in succession would exhaust all the power of his soul. Chapter 1740. Even though Mo Ling and Ando Fu were extremely excited and filled with desire, they were not bold enough to set foot in the dwelling. They all looked at Jianshin. Jianshin was afraid to enter, and the two of them were afraid to enter as well. Now that Jianshin's strength had gradually been exposed, not only did Ando Fu fear him to the extreme, but even Mo Ling was no longer as casual when he spoke with Jianshin. Jianshin sucked in a deep breath and endured the dizziness that came from the ruckus. He carefully and cautiously entered the dwelling. The overgod's dwelling was spacious and simple. There was a huge circular square in the center, and there were a few secret rooms scattered around the square. They were all engraved with words like alchemy room, pill room, seclusion room, sword comprehension building, scrolls pavilion, storage room, and so on. Jianshin and Shenjian both looked at the sword comprehension building, while Mo Ling and Ando Fu looked between the pill room and scrolls pavilion. As for Fairy Haoyue, she only glanced around casually before losing interest. She did not believe that there was anything here that could help her reconstruct her body. Shenjian looked away from the sword comprehension building very quickly and looked at the pill room. He said to Jianshin, "Let's go take a look at the pill room first." "All right." Jianshin nodded and made his way to the pill room with Shenjian, Mo Ling, and Ando Fu, and the others followed closely behind. They did not act on their own. Although there were formations in the pill room as well, it was nowhere near as powerful as the one at the entrance. It was only at the god level, so it was only a basic defense. Obviously, it was unable to stop Jianshin and the others, so they broke through it easily. Entering the alchemy room, a rich pill fragrance immediately assailed his nostrils. He saw that this small alchemy room was filled with hundreds of jade bottles of various sizes. They were neatly arranged together, exquisite and beautiful. Every jade bottle was marked with the name of the pill inside. The Constitution Nurturing Yuan Pill. This is a relatively common pill. Its greatest effect is to strengthen one's foundation and nurture one's yuan qi. It is quite effective for those with an unstable foundation. In addition, it will also have some effect on those who have exhausted their yuan qi. Of course, if the situation is too serious, this Constitution Nurturing Yuan Pill will be useless. You will need to use a higher grade pill. The Spirit Awakening Pill is a pill that can stabilize the soul. It has a good effect on people with unstable souls. In addition, during the process of cultivation, there are often people who can't keep their minds and go mad. After taking the Spirit Awakening Pill, it can reduce the risk of going mad. Mo Ling and Ando Fu had lived for a very long time, so they obviously had a lot of knowledge. They recognized most of the pills on display, and they both began to comment on them. Was this the eternal pill? There's actually an eternal pill here. Suddenly, Mo Ling's face changed. He immediately became overjoyed. He immediately grabbed a jade bottle and studied it carefully. He said excitedly, "This eternal pill is a 5th grade truth tier pill. Every single one of them is quite expensive. The cheapest is 1,000,000 low-grade divine crystals, and sometimes even more. Moreover, they can only be bought in the royal capital of the divine kingdom of Pingtian. They don't exist in the 36 provinces." Ando Fu made his way over as well and said excitedly, "It really is a life pill. The life pill is specially used to recover origin energy. Although every single pill is priceless, it's worth it because the effects of the life pill are extremely great. Even if a late god's origin energy has been completely depleted, a single pill will allow them to replenish all their origin energy within 10 seconds. At certain crucial moments, the eternal pill can save their lives." What? A late god's origin energy can be completely replenished in 10 seconds? Jianqin was surprised when he heard about the effects of the pill. He immediately made his way over. Mo Ling immediately passed the bottle of eternal pills to Jianqin. Jianqin did not hold back at all. He accepted the bottle and opened it. 10 pure white, round pills lay inside quietly. Every single one of them was only the size of a finger. Jianqin closed the bottle and looked through the shelves again. He discovered that there were actually 6 bottles of eternal pills in the room. Each bottle contained 10 pills, so there were 60 in total. In the end, after some discussion, it was decided that Jianqin and Shenjian would take 2 bottles each, while Mo Ling and Ando Fu would take 1 each. Originally, Mo Ling and Ando Fu refused to accept the pills. They would be satisfied with just 1 or 2. After all, Jianqin had contributed the most to them being able to enter this place. As a matter of fact, Mo Ling and Ando Fu even suspected that Jianqin would be able to get through the formation all by himself, even without their assistance. However, under Jianqin's insistence, they ended up giving Mo Ling and Ando Fu a bottle each. Ando Fu's emotions became extremely mixed as he held the bottle of eternal pills. Originally, he only thought he was Jianqin's captive. Even if he entered the divine king's dwelling, he would only be a tool to clear the way. No matter what he found, he would not get a share of it. However, he had never thought that Jianqin would treat him the same as Mo Ling. He was not discriminated against at all, giving him a bottle of such precious eternal pills without any hesitation at all. The pill of resurrection is a healing pill. It's already at the 7th grade of the truth tier. Heavens, a pill like this can be sold for 1.5 million low-grade divine crystals in the royal capital of the divine kingdom of Pingtian. Yet there are actually 2 bottles here. The Fire Cloud pill is a pill that can temporarily increase one's strength. It can ignore the restrictions of the laws of the world and forcefully increase one's cultivation by a minor level. However, it will result in an extremely powerful backlash, which will greatly weaken one's vitality. 10,000-year God origin pills. There are 10 in a bottle, yet there are actually 4 bottles here. Heavens, these are 10,000-year God origin pills. These pills are worth far more than the eternal pills. A single 10,000-year God origin pill in the royal capital costs 10 million low-grade divine crystals. Ando Fu's shocked voice rang out in Jianshen's head. Jianshen rejoiced when he heard about the 10,000-year God origin pills. He arrived before Ando Fu in a flash and snatched the bottle from his hand. He opened the bottle eagerly and saw that there were also 10 pills inside. Help me find how many bottles of 10,000-year God origin pills there are, Jianshen said in a hurry. 10,000-year God origin pills were exactly what he needed. Brother Jianshen, there's one more bottle here. It's also the last bottle. There are only 2 bottles in total in this room. Mo Ling passed a jade bottle to Jianshen. To no surprise, it was filled with 10,000-year God origin pills. 2 bottles of 10,000-year God origin pills. That's a total of 20 pills. Jianshen held the 2 bottles. He ignored the dizziness in his soul as he became extremely excited. 20 10,000-year God origin pills were equivalent to 200,000 years of cultivation. They could strengthen his chaotic Niden by quite a lot. Even though the 20 10,000-year God origin pills might not be enough for him to reach the 10th layer of the chaotic body, they could take a step closer. It might even be enough for his chaotic Niden to reach the 9th layer. At that time, he would only need to consume some heavenly resources or absorb divine crystals to reach the 10th layer successfully. He really is the disciple of the divine King Duanmu after all. Just the pill room alone has so many precious pills. His wealth has completely surpassed the other overgods. Mo Ling and Ando Fu both sighed in amazement. The disciple of the divine King Duanmu was much wealthier than their ancestor. Chapter 1741. What? There's actually a soul recovery pill? Before Jianshen could say anything, Mo Ling and Ando Fu were both surprised. They stared at the white jade bottle in Xin Jian's hand in shock. Jianshen's eyes lit up as well. He had used 2 strands of profound sword qi consecutively, so the power of his soul was extremely depleted. He felt dizzy at all times, like an ordinary person who had not slept for several days. It was very uncomfortable. If the soul recovery pill really could recover the power of his soul, it would be of great significance to him. The profound sword qi was Jianshen's greatest trump card right now. At the same time, it was his greatest life-saving treasure. However, with his current cultivation, the power of his soul had basically been depleted after using 2 strands of profound sword qi. Before his soul recovered, he would not be able to use more profound sword qi. If he had a soul recovery pill that could quickly recover the power of his soul, would it not drastically shorten the time he needed to use the profound sword qi again? I wonder what the effects of the soul recovery pill are like. If it can recover the power of my soul extremely quickly, it'll be very useful to me. It might even be able to save my life, Jianshen thought. He accepted the jade bottle from Xin Jian. To no surprise, there were also 10 soul recovery pills in there. Jianshen poured out a round pill without any hesitation and studied it in his hand. The light in his eyes flickered as he became eager. It really is a soul recovery pill. It really is a soul recovery pill. It's exactly the same as what the records say. There's no mistaking the unique fragrance. I never thought there would be a treasure like a soul recovery pill here, Ando Fu said excitedly. Ancestor, you've been too careless. How is this the dwelling of a regular overgod? The treasures here have far exceeded what regular late overgods possess. There are even some pills that will be extremely useful to you. You shouldn't have given up on this dwelling in the past, Mo Ling said regretfully. He felt great pity. Jianshen became even more overjoyed when he heard what Mo Ling and Ando Fu had said. He studied the pill in great interest and murmured, "Looks like the soul recovery pill is quite valuable." Brother Jianchen, you don't know this, but the soul recovery pill isn't just valuable. It's basically priceless because only alchemists can refine it, and the materials used to refine it are extremely valuable. In a remote place like our divine kingdom of Pingtian, there are no pills like this for sale. Even if there are, they can't be bought with low-grade divine crystals. Instead, you need high-grade divine crystals or even supreme-grade divine crystals, Mo Ling explained to Jianchen. The soul recovery pill was very one. It's that expensive. Jianchen and Shenjian both leapt in fright. 100,000 high-grade divine crystals was equivalent to 10 million mid-grade divine crystals. At that moment, Jianchen's hands began to tremble slightly. The soul recovery pill was just too valuable. Even with his mental fortitude, he struggled to calm down. After all the wealth he had plundered from the Liu family and the Ando clan was probably not even as valuable as a single soul recovery pill. Jianchen immediately gave up on the thought of ingesting the soul recovery pill. He placed it back into the jade bottle without any hesitation. Eating a single soul recovery pill would cost him 10 million mid-grade divine crystals and 1 billion low-grade divine crystals. That was basically a waste. He did not even have enough divine crystals to buy a flying snow sword in Maple Leaf City. Jianchen, I suggest you ingest a soul recovery pill immediately so that you can recover to your peak condition as soon as possible. There must be quite a lot of people gathered outside. No one knows when they'll be able to come in, Fairy Haoyue suggested. That's right. Now is not the time to be saving. We can't waste too much time, Shenjian said as well. Jianchen hesitated slightly when he heard that. In the end, he gritted his teeth and ingested a soul recovery pill. As soon as the soul recovery pill entered his stomach, Jianchen felt a cool sensation rise up. It directly entered his soul, and immediately the power of his soul that had basically been depleted rapidly recovered. In just a few seconds, the power of Jianchen's soul had completely recovered. Moreover, the effects of the soul recovery pill did not run out even after his soul had been replenished. Instead, it turned into strands of clear energy that were stored in his soul. Once his soul was depleted, it would immediately be replenished. What a wondrous pill! Jianchen could not help but sigh in amazement. A single soul recovery pill can completely recover the soul of an early overgod. If you use it on the Divine King, you'll need several or even several dozen of them, said Fairy Haoyue. The power of Jianchen's soul was nowhere near as powerful as an overgod right now, so a single soul recovery pill was more than enough. However, once his strength increased in the future, the power of his soul would naturally increase as well. At that time, if he wanted to use the soul recovery pill to recover the power of his soul, he would need far more than that. This was because the amount of power of the soul that the soul recovery pill could recover was fixed. Afterwards, Jianchen gave Mo Ling and Ando Fu one each, which greatly moved the two of them. They were extremely excited. He shared the remaining pills with Shenjian. They're good pills, but it's a pity that there's only a single bottle. Jianchen sighed gently after putting the soul recovery pill away. He felt some pity. If only there were a few more bottles of soul recovery pills. Afterwards, Jianchen and the others did not come across any extraordinarily precious pills in the room. Most of them were ordinary items. In the end, they spent almost an hour to clear out all the bottles and jars in the room. Apart from the 10,000-year god origin pills, Jianchen gave a portion of the remaining pills to Mo Ling and Ofu and the others. Even the elders did not return empty-handed. Jianchen, I and Ofu will remember your kindness. If there's an opportunity in the future, I will definitely repay you, Ando Fu swore solemnly. Ando Fu swore on the spot. He was extremely serious about it. He had never thought that there would be such a straightforward person in the world. Even when he was completely outclassed in strength, he was still willing to give so many precious pills to a prisoner like him. If it were someone else, Ando Fu believed that he would not have been able to obtain anything at all. He might even have been killed on the spot. Brother Jianqin is truly a gentleman. It's my fortune to be able to meet Brother Jianqin. Mo Ling sighed. If it were him, the Ando clan and the Liu family who discovered the pills here, the three clans would probably have immediately begun fighting over the pills. This was because the pills here were just too precious. Even the divine kingdom of Pingtian did not have the soul recovery pills, and just the 10,000-year god origin pills were priceless. Moreover, there were many other types of pills as well. There was no lack of precious items among them. Jianqin and the others made their way out of the alchemy room before entering the alchemy room, the seclusion room, and the scrolls pavilion. There was only an ancient cauldron in the alchemy room. The cauldron was of quite a high grade, so it was naturally taken away by Jianqin. As for the seclusion room, it was an empty room. There was nothing there at all. In the scrolls pavilion, there were some cultivation methods and battle skills, as well as some cultivation notes left behind by the owner of the dwelling. The cultivation notes had only been created by an overgod. Jianqin glanced through them casually before tossing them to Mo Ling and Ando Fu. As for the remaining cultivation methods and battle skills, Jianqin got Mo Ling and Ando Fu to choose a scroll each. He stowed the rest away. Although neither he nor Xinjian were interested in the cultivation methods and battle skills, they could be sold for quite a good price. Chapter 1742. The Sword Comprehension Building was actually only a stone hut with 2 floors. The walls around it were extremely smooth, like a mirror. There were no flaws at all. However, Jianqin and Xinjian could tell with a single glance that the walls had been ground away by a sharp and brutal sword intent. Moreover, when the two of them entered the hut, they could not help but feel like they had entered the body of a sword. They could feel a surging sword chi. Sword spirit. It's at least sword spirit. Jianqin shivered inside when he sensed the invisible sword chi in the surroundings. He actually felt a suffocating pressure in the stone hut. This pressure came from his comprehension of the laws of the sword. After all, he was already at the great perfection of sword origin. Only sword spirits could pressure him in the way of the sword. Suddenly, Jianqin's eyes narrowed. There was a sharp strand of sword chi on one of the walls of the hut. When his gaze landed on the sword chi, his entire body could not help but tremble. Vaguely, he seemed to sense a surging sword chi shooting toward him. Before the sword chi, Jianqin felt like he was a lone boat in the surging ocean, about to be swallowed by the waves at any time. He was as puny as an ant before the sword chi. Even though he had reached the great perfection of sword origin, he was still so puny. Jianqin remained as still as a mountain. His calm eyes immediately erupted with light at that moment. It was as if 2 streaks of light had shot out from his eyes, directly colliding with the incoming sword comprehension intent. He used the sword in the first place, and he possessed extremely great talent for the way of the sword. How could he allow himself to be defeated by the sword chi at a time like this? Even though he knew he was not the opponent, Jianqin would not just sit there and wait for death. He resisted with all his strength fearlessly. As Jianqin resisted with all his strength, he seemed to vaguely hear a boom that only he could sense explode in his mind. Vaguely, he felt like he had broken through some sort of shackle. His entire mind became empty, entering a wondrous state. In his daze, he seemed to see a hazy image. In the image, a green-robed person stood in the hut with his back to him. He radiated with a supreme presence, along with a powerful sword chi that even shocked Jianqin. At this time, the man in the green robe slowly raised the long sword in his hand. Suddenly, a monstrous sword chi burst out from the long sword, and he casually stabbed with the sword. This strike contained the trajectory of the supreme grand Tao and the profundity of the laws of heaven and earth. It was a simple strike, but it contained a destructive power. When he stabbed out, Jianqin felt like the entire world had become clear. In particular, the strike filled his entire mind, making it seem like the only thing in the world. It drew in all of his attention, and he could clearly sense every single change in the strike. Jianqin could not help but close his eyes as he stood in the hut. He could not help but become intoxicated by the endless mysteries of the strike, comprehending it carefully and entering a state of comprehension. Aside from him, Shen Jian also closed his eyes and entered a state of selflessness. Clearly, he had experienced the same thing as Jianqin. Fairy Haoyue glanced at Jianqin and Shen Jian as a soul. She said to Mo Ling and Ando Fu secretly, "You can leave first. Don't disturb the two of them." Ando Fu and Mo Ling also glanced at the slash on the wall subconsciously. Unfortunately, they could not sense it at all, so they could not tell what it was. The strand of sword qi was clearly meant for imparting knowledge and not harming people. As a result, only those who had also comprehended the way of the sword could comprehend it. Mo Ling and Ando Fu did not walk the path of the way of the sword, so the sword mark was naturally useless against them. Ando Fu and Mo Ling left silently. They planned on checking the final storage room. As for the elders of the Mo clan and Ando clan, they did not know how long Jianqin and Xin Jian would take. In order not to waste their precious time in the Divine King's dwelling, they all went to the dwelling they suspected to be Duanmu's grand disciple's dwelling. There were slashes for comprehending laws there. With their strength as deities, they just happened to be helpful to them. I hope you can make a breakthrough in the way of the sword. The path ahead will be even more difficult. The formations will be even more powerful. Even if I can find their weaknesses, you won't be able to get through them with your current strength. Only by becoming stronger can you make your way to Duanmu's dwelling. Fairy Haoyue murmured softly as she stared at Jianqin and Shen Jian, who had entered a state of selflessness. All she could do now was wait. The formations leading to the Divine King's dwelling were even more powerful. She could not enter as long as the formations remained. Whether she could make it to the very depths would all depend on Jianqin and Xin Jian. Suddenly, Fairy Haoyue's eyes narrowed. She abruptly turned her head towards the entrance of the Divine King's dwelling. The space there actually rippled. Fairy Haoyue frowned and said sternly, "Looks like the people outside will be coming in very soon. We don't have much time left." At this moment, a deafening rumble echoed through the surroundings outside God King Duanmu's dwelling. Several dozen over-gods stood in a circle as they worked together to blow up the formations around the entrance. Every single one of the formations was extremely powerful. They possessed the power to deal with or even kill over-gods. When several dozen of them detonated at the same time, the shockwave was naturally earth-shaking. It actually caused the space there to distort. Now, the number of over-gods gathered here had increased to over 50. There were no longer just 4 participating divine kingdoms. Instead, there were 7 now. Among them, a white-haired old man with a sage-like demeanor stood at the very front. He held a yin-yang 8 trigrams disc in his hand and stared intently at the formation that had exploded. The over-gods around the old man all treated him politely. They all behaved very humbly. This was because the old man was a renowned formations master they had invited. Not only was he well respected, but his cultivation was not weak either. He had reached late over God, and he was known as Master Qianlong. At the same time, it was also this Master Qianlong who came up with the idea of casting down powerful formations around the entrance of the Divine King's dwelling before detonating them. They would create a powerful attack in an attempt to force out the entrance hidden in space. Just a little more. Let's do it again. This time the entrance will definitely appear, Master Qianlong said leisurely as he hovered in the air. As a result, under Master Qianlong's personal lead, a few over-gods who had studied formations quite a bit began to cast down formations once again. Several days later, Master Qianlong finally finished casting down the formations Once again, after several dozen over-gods worked together. This time there were over 100 formations, and they were all at the level of over-gods. A few thousand meters away from this place, a young man with a folding fan in his hand was lying comfortably on a recliner with his eyes closed, as if he was asleep. Beside this young man, 2 beautiful women were half squatting there, attentively massaging the young man's shoulders and legs. They were very serious. The 2 women were not weak either. They had already reached the deity realm. Let alone in the Dong and province, deities were powerful existences, even in the divine kingdom of Pingtian. However, they were massaging a young man who was only a god right now. Even over-gods would struggle to enjoy such treatment. This was because, even in clans with over-gods, deities possessed extraordinary statuses. It was impossible for them to be sent to do something for servants. However, there was not the slightest hint of coercion or reluctance on these 2 women's faces. Instead, both of them had excited looks on their faces. It was as if being able to massage this young man was a very fortunate thing. At this moment, the young man who seemed to have fallen asleep on the recliner opened his eyes. He yawned lazily and looked ahead in a rather sleepy manner. He said rather unhappily, "Why hasn't the entrance opened yet?" "Uncle Chin, how long have I been cultivating?" "Young master, you've already been cultivating for 5 years," the burly man behind the young man said emotionlessly. "P.S. Xiaoyao has never made it to the top of the red packet rankings. This week, Xiaoyao will go all out. Every time the number of red packets reaches 500, Xiaoyao will add a chapter. Every time there are 500 red packets, Xiaoyao will add a chapter. This week, we will work hard towards first place." Chapter 1743. The young man sat up from the recliner slowly. He spread his fingers and opened the fan in his hand with a swish. He fanned himself gently as he looked at the formations cast down by the several dozen over-gods under Master Chanlung's command. He immediately became interested and said, "Uncle Chin, can you make the entrance hidden in outer space appear this time?" The burly man referred to as Uncle Chin shook his head gently. Although their method is correct, it's still a little lacking if they want to force out the entrance hidden in outer space. Duanmu has comprehended the laws of the sword and the laws of space. He has basically reached the limits of the Divine King in both of these laws, so it'll be difficult for these over-gods to force out the entrance hidden in outer space. The young man stood up from the recliner, lazily. He just stood there and stretched his body before glancing at the 2 beautiful deities who stood to one side obediently. He could not help but smile faintly. With a flip of his hand, a jade bottle appeared in the young man's hand. The eyes of the burly man beside the young man widened when he saw the jade bottle in the young man's hand. His face twitched a few times in an abnormal manner. The young man poured out 2 pills from the bottle. The pills hovered in the air under the control of an invisible power, slowly arriving before the 2 women. The 2 women's gazes landed on the 2 pills, looking very excited. "I'm a man of my word. Since you've served me for 5 years, I naturally won't treat you badly. Here are 2 10,000-year god origin pills, 1 for each of you," the young man said nonchalantly. He was extremely generous. There was only a single 10,000-year god origin pill in the entire divine kingdom of Pingtian, and it had been brought back by the divine king of the divine kingdom of Pingtian from another divine kingdom. It was so expensive that it had yet to be sold even now. Although the 10,000-year god origin pill had a very great drawback, there was a second reason that prevented it from being sold, which was that it was just too expensive. "Thank you, young master. Thank you, young master." The 2 deities congratulated him. They were extremely excited as they stowed the pill away carefully like they had obtained a supreme treasure. "All right, the 2 of you can leave now. Do what you need to do. I'll give you your freedom in advance," the young man said as he waved the fan in his hand. The 2 women expressed their gratitude and did not stay any longer. They left the place excitedly. They had only spent 5 years to obtain a precious 10,000-year god origin pill. To them, This was simply too worth it. It was like a meat pie falling from the sky. Young master, I don't remember you ever having a 10,000-year god origin pill on you. Moreover, with your talent, the family would never give you such a pill. Did you secretly enter Elder Gu's pill room? Uncle Chin asked after the two women left. The young man closed the fan in his hand and glanced at Uncle Chin in a slightly guilty manner. He said, "How could that be? Uncle Chin, you're thinking too much. Moreover, even you can't enter Elder Gu's pill recipe, so how can I? Don't you think so? But where did your 10,000-year god origin pill come from? All right. Uncle Chin, let's not talk about pills. It's just a 10,000-year god origin pill. With my status, obtaining it is a piece of cake," the young man interrupted Uncle Chin. Then he looked around and stared at the entrance to the Divine King's dwelling. He said, "So many people have used 5 years, and they still haven't made the entrance appear. I don't have that much time to wait for them here. Uncle Chin, please help them out. If they continue like this, they'll just be wasting my time." Uncle Chin glanced at the young man rather helplessly and nodded slightly. "Detonate the formations." It was also at this moment that Master Chanlong's ancient voice rang out. Afterwards, a deafening rumble suddenly rang out. All the over-god level formations at the entrance detonated at the same time, forming a powerful attack that ripped through the space there. The space immediately trembled gently. However, with so many over-god level formations detonated at the same time, the terrifying attack was still not enough to rip through the space there. It was also in the moment that the formations detonated that Uncle Chin beside the young man took action as well. He only raised a finger and extended it gently at the entrance to the Divine King's dwelling. This point immediately caused the space in front of him to silently ripple. This finger seemed extremely ordinary, like an ordinary person casually pointing a finger. However, this finger shook the space here. However, at that moment, everyone's gazes were gathered in the direction of God King Duanmu's dwelling. None of them noticed Uncle Chin's finger. It was also after Uncle Chin extended his finger that the space at the entrance to the Divine King's dwelling shook violently. The space there seemed to be ripped open, revealing a stone door hidden in the space there. The powerful shockwave from the explosion of several dozen over-god level formations was unable to shake the stone door at all. "The entrance has appeared. It's the door that leads to the Divine King's entrance. Master Chanlong really is a formations master after all. He really is powerful. He's actually managed to force the entrance to the Divine King's dwelling out of space. Master Chanlong, I'm impressed. The over-gods in the surroundings all praised Master Chanlong. They all praised him. Master Chanlong stroked his snow-white beard as he held the 8 trigrams disc in his hand. He smiled mysteriously, and his face was filled with confidence. When the young man with a folding fan saw this scene from afar, the corners of his mouth curled up into a meaningful smile. "There's a powerful formation on the stone door. Please help me get through it, Master Chanlong. Master Chanlong will be relying on you for this formation." The over-gods in the surroundings all invited Master Chanlong to continue getting through the formation. Their voices were filled with even more respect. "As long as the entrance has appeared, the formation will be much easier to deal with. As long as it's a formation, it needs energy to operate. As long as the energy is depleted, the formation will collapse no matter how powerful it is. I'll let Old Man take a look at the weakness of the formation," Jianqin said loudly. He arrived before the stone door with his head held high and his chest puffed out. He stared at the stone door attentively. The moment the entrance to God King Duanmu's dwelling appeared, the entire space within the dwelling began to tremble gently as if it had suffered a powerful attack. Fairy Haoyue looked in the direction of the entrance from outside the Sword Comprehension Building, and she became stern. She murmured, "There's less and less time left." Chapter 1744. In the blink of an eye, another half a month passed. Outside the entrance of the Divine King's dwelling, A gleam of light suddenly flashed through Master Chanlong's eyes as he studied the formation. He said, "It's here. Everyone, attack with your full strength." Without any hesitation, the several dozen over-gods all struck out. They attacked the weakness that Master Chanlong had mentioned with all their might. Even though this was the weakness of the formation, it was still a formation personally cast down by God King Duanmu after all. It would not be easy for the over-gods to get through it with their strength. Several dozen over-gods bombarded the weak point of the formation for 10 days and 10 nights. Only then did they destroy it. However, the stone door remained shut. The light of the formation continued to flicker outside. There was more than one formation there. There are a total of 18 formations on the stone door. There are 17 left. Let's get Old Man to study the second formation. Master Chanlong swung his sleeves and continued to study before the formation. This person has some accomplishments in formations. If this continues, all of Duanmu's formations will be destroyed sooner or later, Uncle Chin said nonchalantly as he watched from afar. A year later, 8 of the 18 formations on the stone door had been broken. There were still 10 formations left to block the group. At the same time, Shun Jian roused from his selfless state in the Sword Comprehension building in the Divine King's dwelling. After this period of comprehension, his laws of the sword had reached the great perfection of sword origin, while Jianqin was still comprehending. He had yet to awaken. Shin Jian did not disturb Jianqin. He made his way out of the stone hut silently. The longer one comprehended like this, the greater the benefits. Jianqin's laws of the sword had already reached the great perfection of sword origin before Xinjian, so he had spent even more time comprehending. Coupled with Jianqin's talent, Shun Jian realized that Jianqin's laws of the sword might break through. Afterwards, Shun Jian sat down outside the sword comprehension building. He placed the cloud stream sword on his knees and formed a seal with his hands. He began to cultivate again. Before long, a mysterious power began to radiate from his body. In the end, it actually gradually formed specks of light, flickering around Xinjian. In a daze, the flickering light formed a diagram of the cosmos around Xinjian. As for Shenzhen, he was an incomparably tall giant sitting cross-legged in the middle of the galaxy. He was now a god, so he could use the second move of A will that splits the heavens. Although he had used the second move against the evil spirit before, he had paid a huge price to forcefully use it. Not only was its power, but it was also its essence. He was still very far away from truly grasping the essence of the second move. As a result, he needed to carefully comprehend the second move of A will that splits the heavens now that his cultivation had reached God. This battle skill is of quite a high grade. It looks like Shun Jian has obtained the legacy of a great figure as well, or he would never be able to grasp such a high-grade battle skill. Moreover, even his sword is definitely not as simple as it seems. Fairy Haiyue stared at Shun Jian from afar as the light in her eyes flickered. Another half a year passed like this. Suddenly, a powerful sword intent radiated from the sword comprehension building. Sword Qi revolved around Jianqin as he stood in the sword comprehension building. Silver-white sword Qi that was only the size of a finger seemed to have transformed into fish, swimming around Jianqin happily. Compared to the sword Qi Jianqin used in the past, these sword Qi were no longer as rigid as before. Instead, they seemed to possess intelligence, as if every single strand of sword Qi possessed life. Jianqin's laws of the sword had finally broken through after this period of comprehension. He had officially reached sword spirit from the great perfection of sword origin. Over God-level comprehension of the laws of the world, the light in Fairy Haiyue's eyes flickered when she sensed the disturbance in the sword comprehension building. Surprise filled her face. At this moment, Jianqin's comprehension of the laws of the sword was equivalent to an over-god. Even I feel slightly envious of Jianqin's comprehension ability, Fairy Haiyue sighed emotionally. When she first met Jianqin on the Tianyuan continent, Jianqin was still a sainthood cultivator. He had not even comprehended the laws of the world. Yet in just a few years he had gone from a mortal to where he was today. He was already equivalent to an overgod. The only flaw was that Jianqin's personal cultivation was just too low. The 9th layer of the chaotic body was only equivalent to a deity. Jianqin was probably the only person in the entire saints' world who had comprehended the laws of the world as a deity and as an overgod. This was because it was just too difficult for him to break through to the next layer of the chaotic body. He required tremendous amounts of cultivation resources. The sword chi around Jianqin settled down very soon, but he did not leave the sword comprehension building. Instead, he directly made his way to the 2nd floor. The 2nd floor was extremely spacious as well. There was only a stone table in the center, and there was a scroll on the table. Jianqin arrived before the stone table and carefully checked it. Only after confirming that there was no danger did he pick up the scroll and slowly unfurl it. The moment the scroll was unfurled, Jianqin's eyes narrowed. He felt like the scroll seemed to expand rapidly in his eyes, becoming boundless in the blink of an eye. In the end, it turned into a world of mountains and rivers, and he stood in that world of mountains and rivers. A middle-aged man in a green robe had silently appeared in front of him. The middle-aged man had a heroic appearance and a dignified appearance. He had sharp, sword-like eyebrows and eyes that were as bright as the stars. His body radiated with a surging sword intent. The sword intent was so powerful that even Jianqin, who had reached sword spirit, felt extremely pressured. The divine King Duanmu. Jianqin's heart shuddered. Even though he had never seen the man before him before, he was extremely certain that the man was the master of the dwelling, the divine King Duanmu. However, this was not the divine King Duanmu's true form. It was a projection he had left behind in the past. This scroll should have been used by the divine King Duanmu to teach his disciples, Jianqin thought. At this moment, the divine King Duanmu began to swing his sword in the air. His swordsmanship was brutal and sharp. Every single strike was filled with sharp sword chi. His attacks were extremely terrifying. Every single strike would touch the trajectories of the ways of the world, as if they had fused with the ways and possessed the power of the laws of the world. This was a scroll that the divine King Duanmu had left behind. He had imprinted all of his comprehensions of the laws of the sword into the scroll without holding back, passing it on selflessly. The person who passed it on was not Jianqin, but his disciple. However, now that Jianqin had come into contact with the scroll and brought it into the illusionary world, he naturally treated Jianqin as the divine King Duanmu's disciple. After all, the scroll was an inanimate object. It did not possess any intelligence, so it was naturally unable to differentiate between the two. Jianqin remained in the illusionary world of the scroll. He stared at the divine King Duanmu as he swung his sword in the air as if he was intoxicated. He carefully comprehended every single use of the laws of the sword that the divine King Duanmu used. Not only does the divine King Duanmu use the laws of the sword, but he also uses the laws of space as well. Jianqin's heart skipped a beat. He was filled with admiration. Not only did the divine King Duanmu possess great accomplishments in the laws of the sword, but his comprehension of the laws of space had also reached an extremely profound level. Chapter 1745. I originally comprehended the laws of space as well, but they were stripped away by the sword spirits so that I could focus on the way of the sword. If I were to comprehend other ways while studying the way of the sword, it would definitely be a waste of time and effort. It'll just prolong the time it takes for me to reach the peak of the way of the sword, Jianqin thought. He agreed with what the sword spirits had done very much. Focusing all of his attention on the way of the sword would indeed allow him to reach the peak of the way of the sword in the shortest amount of time. If he were to comprehend other ways while studying the way of the sword, it would indeed take quite a lot of time and effort. Although the peak experts of both the immortals world and the saints world grasped more than one way, many of them would first comprehend the first way to an extremely profound level, standing at the apex of their world. They would only begin to comprehend other ways after they possessed enough power to protect themselves. Even if something unexpected happened, they would still be able to protect themselves. If they comprehended several ways right from the start, it would take quite a lot of time and effort. No matter how great their talent was, it would take them a long time to reach the apex. It was extremely likely that they would die during that time due to various reasons. Whether it was the immortals world or the saints world, there were many supreme prodigies who died. I don't know the laws of space anymore, so I'll ignore the divine king's laws of space. I'll just comprehend his way of the sword. Genshin calmed himself down and comprehended carefully. Genshin could not sense the flow of time at all. After who knew how much time had passed, the divine king finally stopped brandishing his sword. His figure gradually faded into outer space, vanishing in a few seconds. Genshin's consciousness retreated from the scroll as well. The scroll in his hand had closed by itself. At the same time, he discovered that Shan Jian had appeared beside him at some point in time. This scroll will be of great help to us. Take a look. I need to enter secluded cultivation immediately. Genshin passed the scroll to Shan Jian before leaving the building and entering secluded cultivation. As for Shan Jian, he opened the scroll, just like Genshin, and his consciousness was also sucked into the scroll world, experiencing the same thing as Genshin. In the blink of an eye, another month passed. After a month of seclusion, Genshin finally emerged. During this period of seclusion, he had completely digested the insights he had gained from watching the divine King Duanmu perform his sword dance. This had deepened his comprehension of the way of the sword. Even though he was still stuck at the minor achievement of sword spirit, he had undoubtedly taken a huge step towards the intermediate achievement of sword spirit. He was much closer to the intermediate achievement of sword spirit. Shan Jian had benefited greatly from the scroll as well. Although he was still at the great perfection of sword origin, he was much closer to sword spirit now. Of course, being able to comprehend so much from the divine King Duanmu's scroll all depended on their talent and comprehension ability. The greater their comprehension ability, the more they would benefit. If someone with ordinary comprehension were to obtain the divine King Duanmu's scroll, they would not be able to benefit from it, even if they read it 10 times, 100 times, or even 1,000 times. If one did not have enough aptitude, even if the simplest Tao imparting scroll was placed in front of them, they would not be able to enter the door and would not gain anything. Genshin frowned as soon as he emerged from the cultivation room. He looked in the direction of the exit of the divine King Duanmu's dwelling. That was where they had entered from. There were actually rumbles from there. You've sensed it too. The people outside are attacking the entrance. They'll be here before long. Fairy Hua arrived before Genshin and said sternly. Genshin became stern as well. Although his strength had skyrocketed and his comprehension of the laws of the sword had reached sword spirit, he knew that there would definitely be a large group of overgods gathered outside right now. He was invincible below overgod with his current strength, but he still did not stand a chance against an overgod. This was because those who could become overgods would not be any weaker than him in terms of comprehension of the laws of the world. Some overgods might even be more powerful than him. Before overgods, his comprehension of the laws of the world would not hold an advantage. Moreover, there was a huge flaw in his personal cultivation. Once a battle broke out, he would definitely lose. The light in Genshin's eyes flickered. Suddenly, he gritted his teeth, and with a flip of his hand, he took out 2 white jade bottles from his space ring. To no surprise, there was the symbol of 10,000-year god origin pills on the outside of the bottles. I can only consume the 10,000-year god origin pills now. It's a pity that I only have 20 of them. I wonder if I can reach the 10th layer of the chaotic body with these 20 pills, Genshin said in a deep voice. Faced with the threat of so many overgods, he could only consume the 10,000-year god origin pills beforehand. Only by becoming stronger would he be able to protect himself against the overgods. Jianqin turned around and entered the cultivation room. He continued his cultivation, but this time he did not cultivate to comprehend the laws of the sword. Instead, he consumed the 10,000-year god origin pills to increase his strength. Jianqin sat in the gloomy room. He opened a jade bottle and took out a 10,000-year god origin pill. He ingested it without any hesitation at all. As soon as the 10,000-year god origin pill reached his stomach, it immediately erupted as an extremely violent energy within Jianqin's body. Jianqin felt like he had not ingested a pill at all, but a bomb. If someone with a weaker body had ingested such a violent energy, they probably would have exploded instantly. However, Jianqin cultivated the chaotic body. Even if the effects of the pills were several times more potent, Jianqin could still endure them because the toughness of his body was one of the greatest advantages of the chaotic body. Jianqin directly ignored the aftereffects of the pills. He ingested all 20 of them, turning them into violent energy that wreaked havoc in his body before gradually being refined into chaotic force. The chaotic Niden in his dantian expanded bit by bit as well. Mo Ling and Fu and over a dozen godhood elders had gathered outside the cultivation room. All of them were worried. The disturbance from the divine king's entrance was becoming greater and greater. Even with their strength, they could sense it clearly, which filled all of them with unease. After all, they were the first people to enter the dwelling. Once the overgods outside barged in, they would definitely suspect that they had profited greatly. They would never let them go. A month later, Jianqin had consumed all 20 10,000-year god origin pills. However, to Jianqin's disappointment, they did not allow him to break through to the 10th layer of the chaotic body. Chapter 1746. Jianqin emerged from the cultivation room with a heavy heart. The amount of energy he needed to raise his chaotic body from the 9th layer to the 10th layer was just far too tremendous. 20 10,000-year god origin pills were not enough. According to his estimations, he would need at least 80 10,000-year god origin pills to reach the 10th layer. Although he still possessed some heavenly resources from the Xianhuang microcosm, he was just too far away from the 10th layer. Even if he consumed the heavenly resources, he would not be able to reach the 10th layer. This was because he could not consume too many heavenly resources, or his body would develop a resistance to the heavenly resources, which would drastically reduce their effects. If he was close to the 10th layer, when Jianqin emerged from the cultivation room, Shen Jian and Fu and Mo Ling and the other deities had all gathered there. They had all been alarmed by the growing disturbance at the entrance of the divine king's dwelling, so they were all extremely stern. The people outside will come in very soon. We need to venture deeper into the dwelling, Shen Jian said with a deep voice. The divine king's dwelling was indeed very large, but there was nowhere for people to hide. Once the people outside surged in, they would definitely search the entire dwelling. It would be impossible to hide before overgods. Brother Jianqin, we've collected everything in the storage room. Whether it's useful or not, we've stored it all in this space ring. Moreover, there are some divine crystals in the storage room. They're all high-grade divine crystals. Mo Ling passed a space ring to Jianqin. Jianqin accepted the space ring and checked it. He discovered that it was filled with various miscellaneous items. Many of them had no practical use and were only for decoration. There were even some coins that only appeared in the world of mortals. Jianqin was naturally not interested in these items, so he glanced through them hurriedly. In the end, he discovered the divine crystals that Mo Ling had mentioned. There were not many divine crystals. There were only 3 pieces, but every single one of them was frighteningly large. Even Jianqin became stunned when he saw them. A divine crystal was the size of a pinky finger. It was around a centimeter in length, width, and height. However, The 3 divine crystals were so large that they were actually cubes that were a meter long. Jianqin took out the divine crystal from his space ring. He could not help but sigh in amazement when he saw the large piece of high-grade divine crystal. The largest high-grade divine crystal he had ever seen was only the size of a person's head. Yet the divine crystal before him was several dozen times the size of the largest divine crystal he had ever seen. This is a block of divine crystal. A block of divine crystal is a meter in length, width, and height. So a block of divine crystal is equivalent to 1,000,000 standard divine crystals. Divine crystals like this are often used in large transactions. Fairy Haoyue's voice rang out. Mo Ling and Ofu and the other deities all looked at the block of divine crystal enviously. To them, just high-grade divine crystals were rare, let alone such a large piece of high-grade divine crystal. However, they also understood that even though they wanted the divine crystal very much, they could only look and touch it. They would never be able to get a share of it in the end. With our current level of cultivation, using high-grade divine crystals to cultivate is truly too wasteful. I feel that we should exchange all of these high-grade divine crystals for mid-grade divine crystals after we get out of here. That way, we can increase our cultivation even more. High-grade divine crystals were usually used by overgods, but with his cultivation as a god, mid-grade divine crystals were more than enough for him. As for low-grade divine crystals, they were basically used by people below the sky god realm. The help they provided to the sky god realm was almost negligible. Shen Jian had already wasted quite a lot of high-grade divine crystals to break through to God. Now, even if all 3 blocks of high-grade divine crystals were given to him, it would not be enough for him to reach mid-God. If that was the case, he would be better off exchanging them for mid-grade divine crystals. A block of high-grade divine crystals was equivalent to 1,000,000 standard high-grade divine crystals. If they were converted to mid-grade divine crystals, a block of high-grade divine crystals would be worth 100 million mid-grade divine crystals. 100 million mid-grade divine crystals was enough for Shen Jian to break through from early god to mid-god. Since using these 3 blocks of divine crystals won't increase our strength, why don't we just leave them for now? We'll exchange them all once we get out. Jianqin nodded and stowed the block of divine crystals away in his space ring. Bang! At this moment, a heavy sound rang out from the entrance. It was even louder than before, and the space there distorted violently. It looks like the people outside have destroyed another formation. We can't waste any more time. We need to leave immediately and go deeper, Fairy Haoyue said sternly. The situation was becoming more and more urgent. Without any hesitation, they immediately set off. They directly made their way to the depths of the dwelling. That was where the divine King Duanmu cultivated. The formations on the way to where the divine King Duanmu cultivated became more and more powerful. They had even gradually surpassed the level of overgods and reached the level of the divine king. Even though the formations they came across along the way had been destroyed by the 3 overgods, the remnant formations still radiated with terrifying power, causing the hearts of Jianqin's group to thump. They were filled with fear as they became extremely cautious. Very soon, Jianqin discovered 3 skeletons up ahead. They were covered in a thin layer of dust, clearly having died many years ago. Ancestor Mo Ling and Ando Fu could not help but tremble violently when they saw the 3 skeletons. The 2 of them knelt on the ground as sorrow filled their faces. After so many years, this was the first time they had seen the remains of their ancestor. Although they had entered the dwelling in the past, they did not dare to venture any further due to their weak strength. Jianqin also looked at the 3 skeletons, and his expression became mixed. After all, these were 3 overgods. They had only managed to obtain Duanmu's divine king's jade after so much effort, obtaining the key to the Divine King's dwelling. However, not only had they failed to obtain any benefits from the dwelling, but they had even died. This is a hidden killing formation. The three of them accidentally fell into it, which is why they were slain. "Let's avoid this place," said Fairy Haoyue. She led the way for Jianqin and the others. Mo Ling and Ando Fu suppressed their sorrow and bowed towards the skeletons from afar. Afterwards, they followed behind Jianqin and made their way around the place. The three of them also understood that the ancestors' remains were trapped in the killing formation. They were unable to take them away at all. As a matter of fact, they did not even dare to approach the place. After advancing for several hundred meters, they stopped once again. A formation had blocked their path. This formation is extremely powerful. I don't know if you can get through it. I'll find the weakness of the formation, so all of you can try attacking it as hard as you can, said Fairy Haoyue. She stared at the formation for a while before suddenly pointing at a spot 3 inches to the southeast. Attack! Chapter 1747. As soon as Fairy Haoyue finished speaking, Jianqin and the others struck out as hard as they could at the same time. Over a dozen deities fell into a formation as well, unleashing their strongest attack together. On the other hand, Ando Fu and Mo Ling unleashed all their strength, using their most powerful battle skills to attack the weaknesses of the formation. Specks of stars appeared around Xinjian. As he stabbed out with his cloud stream sword as hard as he could, a river of stars immediately appeared. The sky flickered with light as pure and powerful energy surged out, bolstering the cloud stream sword. It shot out as a powerful sword chi. Shen Jian used the second move of A will that splits the heavens that he had comprehended recently without any hesitation, the Sword Finger Galaxy illusion. This time, the Sword Finger Galaxy illusion was clearly much stronger than when he used it against the evil spirit. Even a late heavenly god would have to suffer in front of this move of Shen Jian's, unless his opponent also possessed the battle prowess of a Sky Pride. 2 finger-sized strands of silver-white sword chi hovered above Jianqin's head. They radiated with surging sword chi, and with a thought, the 2 strands of profound sword chi shot out at the same time. They moved extremely quickly, as if they had surpassed lightning. They struck the weak points of the formation that Fairy Haoyue had pointed out in a single instance. Everyone basically launched their full-powered attacks at the same time. With a great boom, Mo Ling, Ando Fu, and the elders all staggered back from the terrifying shockwaves of energy. In particular, the elders all vomited blood as their faces paled. Since Jianqin had launched the 2 strands of profound sword chi at the same time, the attack had reached the level of overgods. Just the shockwaves of energy had heavily injured the elders. Even Mo Ling and Ando Fu constantly staggered back. As the violent shockwaves of energy gradually expanded, the faces of Jianqin and the others became extremely ugly. They had all launched their most powerful attacks without holding back at all. They had even used their greatest trump cards, but the formation remained intact. It seems like we can only stop here. Seeing this, Haoyu softly sighed. He was full of helplessness. Jianqin was also somewhat disheartened. The strength of the formation along the way to the Divine King Duanmu's secret training ground was beyond his imagination. Even though his strength had increased in this cave, he was still far from being able to break the formation here. Boom! At this moment, a loud noise that shook the entire cave came from the exit. Violent energy turbulence came from afar, making the faces of Jianqin and the others turn ugly. Everyone, including Jianqin, felt a great pressure from the ripples of energy. Even late gods would probably die before the ripples of energy. After all, they had gathered all the attacks from several dozen overgods. It was so powerful that even overgods needed to avoid it. Afterwards, dense origin energy surged in from the entrance of the cave, causing the Divine King Duanmu's cave to change from being devoid of origin energy. It was now filled with dense origin energy like the outside world. "The entrance to the cave has been destroyed," Hayu said with a heavy voice. He became extremely stern. With a flip of his hand, a white jade bottle appeared in his hand. He did not have the time to worry about his loss. He directly poured out a soul recovery pill and swallowed it, recovering the power of his soul. He was going to face many overgods next, so he needed to recover to his peak condition. "Let's enter the bright moon divine hall," said Fairy Haoyue. Fairy Haoyue said sternly. Afterwards, her illusionary figure suddenly vanished, having entered the divine hall. Afterwards, she controlled the divine hall to fly out of Jinshin's space ring. It landed on the ground and turned into a majestic divine hall. The doors to the divine hall were wide open. "Come in if you don't want to die. Remember, all of you must seal up your cultivation in my divine hall." Fairy Haoyue's voice rang out from the divine hall. Mo Ling, Ando Fu, and the other deities knew how fragile the bright moon divine hall was, so none of them had any objections. They all sealed up their cultivation and concealed their presences as they entered the divine hall quickly. "Shen Jian, all the overgods will come in later. You should go to the bright moon divine hall as well." Jianshin said when he saw Shen Jian hesitate. Shen Jian was an early god, and his comprehension of the laws of the sword was equivalent to late gods. He was still an extremely great distance away from becoming an overgod. Shen Jian clearly understood this as well. After hesitating slightly, he told Jianshin to be careful before entering the divine hall as well. Once everyone had entered the divine hall rapidly shrank before entering Jianshin's space ring. In the blink of an eye, only Jianshin remained outside the Divine King's dwelling. Although the Divine King's dwelling was very large, there was nowhere for him to hide. He could not escape the search of overgods, so Jianshin did not hide. Fortunately, he sat down where he was and waited for the people outside to enter. The power of his soul that he had depleted from using the 2 strands of profound sword qi recovered rapidly with the assistance of the soul recovery pill. A few seconds later, tremendous presences appeared at the entrance of the Divine King's dwelling. The overgods outside had already entered the dwelling. Several dozen powerful senses of the soul swept through the dwelling fearlessly before all gathering on Jianshin. There's actually someone inside. I heard that someone entered the dwelling a few years ago. Is it him? A surprised exclamation rang out from the entrance of the dwelling. Afterwards, the overgods gathered there all flew towards Jianshin. Overgods moved extremely quickly. In just a few seconds, the overgods appeared before Jianshin. Every single one of them radiated with powerful presences that were as tremendous as the ocean. The person at the very front was an sagely old man. He held an 8 trigrams disc in his hand. He was Master Chanlong. Jianshin slowly opened his eyes as well. He stood up from the ground. After a short moment of recovery, the power of his soul had completely recovered. He slowly glanced past the overgods gathered there and said emotionlessly, "I never thought that there would actually be over 60 overgods. That has exceeded my expectations. I never thought that the temptation of the Divine King's dwelling would be so great." Even though Jianshin faced a very great pressure inside, he remained unfazed on the surface. He showed no fear at all. Indeed, the number of overgods who had come had increased from around 50 to over 60. They had gathered the peak experts of several divine kingdoms in the surroundings. Every single one of them was the ancestor of an organization, and they were a handful of peak experts in their respective divine kingdoms. They were existences that stood above the clouds. "Brother, who are you? Which clan or sect do you come from?" Master Coiling Dragon looked at Jianshin indifferently. Basically, none of the overgods knew about the story of the Divine King's Jade, nor did they know that the Divine King's Jade had once been controlled by 3 small clans with only gods. Now that they saw Jianchen in the dwelling, they naturally began to suspect Jianchen's background and origins. Chapter 1748. As a result, none of the overgods responded to Master Qianlong's question. They all stared at Jianchen coldly. I am Jianchen. I belong to no sect, just an independent cultivator. Jianchen clasped his hands emotionlessly. The overgods all let out a sigh of relief when they heard that Jianchen was an independent cultivator. Afterwards, their gazes towards Jianchen became even sharper. Kid, the key to the dwelling is with you. Who knows how many times you've come here in the past? You must have benefited greatly in the past few years. A skinny, middle-aged man walked out from the crowd and glared at Jianchen. At the same time, a powerful presence radiated from him, directly crushing towards Jianchen. The skinny, middle-aged man was an early overgod. When his presence crushed towards Jianchen, Jianchen immediately felt like he was in a surging sea, where endless waves slammed towards him. If he had not broken through with the laws of the sword, he definitely would not have been able to withstand the middle-aged man's powerful presence. However, his laws of the sword had reached sword spirit now. Although his personal cultivation was still lacking, he was at the same level as the middle-aged man after all. As a matter of fact, he was slightly more powerful than the middle-aged man. Jianchen's face did not change. Suddenly, a sharp sword qi radiated from him. At that moment, he seemed to have become a shining sword. The powerful, invisible sword qi directly shattered the middle-aged man's tremendous presence. The middle-aged man's presence was unable to approach Jianchen at all. Jianchen did not lose out at all in a clash of presences because his cultivation was no lower than the skinny, middle-aged man's. A gleam of light flashed through the middle-aged man's eyes. He stared at Jianchen in surprise, as if he had never thought that Jianchen's comprehension of laws would be on the same level as his. He's actually comprehended the laws of the sword. A gentle voice of surprise rang out from behind the crowd. An old man with an ancient sword on his back walked out. To no surprise, he was Ling Hogong from the sword-seeking province of the divine kingdom of Pingtian. Ling Hogong stared at Jianchen with shining eyes. His eyes shone brighter and brighter as he smiled. Old man, you've finally come across an overgod who has also comprehended the laws of the sword. Jianchen, once the matter with the divine King Duanmu is over, why don't we find an opportunity to spar? We can discuss the way of the sword together. Ling Hogong's gaze was magnanimous as righteousness revolved around him. He seemed like a gentleman, and his eyes were filled with surprise and joy. He was a sword fanatic, but ever since he became an overgod, he could no longer find an expert at the same level as him to spar with. Because of this, he had once left the divine kingdom of Pingtian and traveled through the surrounding divine kingdoms. Although he had come across a few people who had also comprehended the laws of the sword, they were basically all deities and gods. He had never seen an overgod who had comprehended the laws of the sword, which filled him with great regret. Yet today he had come across an overgod who had comprehended the laws of the sword after so many years of searching to no avail. How could Ling Hogong not be excited? As Ling Hogong walked out, a sliver of fear flashed through the eyes of many of the surrounding overgods. Although Ling Hogong was an early overgod, he comprehended the laws of the sword, one of the laws with the greatest offensive prowess among the 3,000 laws. With the laws of destruction and the laws of slaughter, Ling Hogong was extremely powerful. Very few overgods who had comprehended other laws were his opponent at the same level of cultivation. As a matter of fact, Ling Hogong had even fought against a mid-overgod who had comprehended the laws of fire in the past. The battle actually ended in a draw. From then on, Ling Hogong's name spread across all the divine kingdoms in the surroundings. Jianchen could naturally sense that Ling Hogong was a straightforward person, or it would have been impossible for him to be surrounded by righteousness. As a result, he clasped his fist and said, "If the opportunity arises in the future, I will definitely discuss the sword with Senior. Ha ha ha, what Senior? Jianchen, you can just call me Ling Hogong. Ling Hogong laughed loudly. Ling Hogong laughed aloud. He was overjoyed that he had found an over-god who had comprehended the laws of the sword with him. However, Ling Hogong's eyes narrowed soon afterwards. He stared at Jianchen in surprise and doubt and said, Jianchen, what's your cultivation? You don't seem to be an over-god. Ling Hogong was extremely surprised when he saw through Jianchen's cultivation. Although he was unable to see through Jianchen's strength accurately, the senses of an over-god were astonishing. He discovered that not only was Jianchen not an over-god, but he was not even a god. An over-god who has comprehended laws with such a low level of cultivation. Ling Hogong was extremely shocked. A situation like Jianchen's was extremely rare in the saints' world because no one possessed such a heaven-defying ability to comprehend laws. Their comprehension of laws had actually surpassed their cultivation by so much. Moreover, he could tell with a single glance that Jianchen's cultivation was low. It was not because he was injured. Instead, he really had yet to cultivate. Ling Hogong could sense Jianchen's abnormality, so the other overgods could naturally tell as well. Immediately, the light in their eyes flickered. Looks like you've benefited a lot in the divine King Duanmu's dwelling, the skinny man sneered. He yelled at Jianchen coldly. So what if your comprehension is at the level of an over-god? You're still not the opponent of an over-god with such a huge difference in cultivation. Kid, hand over your space ring obediently and tell us what kind of fortuitous encounter you've obtained in the dwelling that allowed your comprehension of laws to increase so quickly. If your answer satisfies us, we might spare you. Otherwise, you should know what the consequences are. Jianchen's face immediately sank when he heard the skinny man's vicious words. Jianchen stared at him coldly and growled, If you want my space ring, then take it yourself. Let's see if you have the right to take it or not. You're looking to die. Killing intent flashed through the skinny man's eyes. A spear appeared in his hand, and he directly stabbed it towards Jianchen with the laws of wood. Although Jianchen's comprehension of the laws of the sword was no weaker than his personal cultivation was not worth mentioning. As a result, the skinny man naturally did not treat Jianchen with any importance. Even though that was the case, the skinny man did not become careless. He used the power of laws as soon as he struck out. A cold light flashed through Jianchen's eyes. However, at this moment, Ling Hogong struck out. He directly drew the ancient sword on his back, and it shone brightly as it landed on the skinny man's spear with surging sword chi. Just this strike forced the skinny man to take a step back. Ling Hogong, what are you doing? The skinny man glared at Ling Hogong as a sliver of fear flashed through the depths of his eyes. The divine King Duanmu is dead, so the treasures will naturally belong to the fated, Ling Hogong said righteously as he held his sword. The skinny man's face sank. If Ling Hogong really wanted to protect Jianchen, there really was nothing he could do with his strength. However, when he glanced past all the overgods around him, he could not help but sneer. Ling Hogong was very powerful, but there were still a few people who could suppress him here. Just when the skinny, middle-aged man wanted to ask someone to suppress Ling Hogong, Jianchen's voice rang out. Ling Hogong, since he wants my space ring so much, let him come and take it. If he wants my space ring, let's see if he has the ability or not. Chapter 1749. The skinny man's face sank even more when he heard Jianchen's provocative words. Cold, killing intent had already appeared in his eyes. Ling Hogong looked at Jianchen. Although Jianchen's comprehension of laws had reached the level of an overgod, his personal cultivation was just too weak. On the other hand, both the skinny man's cultivation and comprehension of laws had reached the level of an overgod. Even though Jianchen had comprehended the laws of the sword, one of the laws with the greatest defensive power, Ling Hogong still did not believe that Jianchen was the skinny man's opponent. However, Ling Hogong could not say anything more when he saw how confident Jianchen was. He retreated to one side with his sword. He wanted to see just how Jianchen would be able to deal with the skinny man without fear. Master Chanlong and the several dozen over-gods gathered there all remained silent. However, without any exception, all of their gazes were fixed on Jianchen. Their gazes were rather sharp. Many people believed that Jianchen's comprehension of laws was far greater than his cultivation because he had obtained some great, fortuitous encounter in the divine king's dwelling. However, they did not want to stand out, so they were more than happy to let the skinny man move against Jianchen. Unless they had no other choice, they really did not want to offend an over-god so easily, especially one who had comprehended the laws of the sword, one of the laws with the greatest offensive power. Of course, there was another reason why they did not want to take action, which was that nothing that could interest them had appeared. Once something that would be of great help to them appeared, they would even be willing to risk their lives against people who were slightly more powerful than them, let alone those who had comprehended the laws of the sword. At the very back of the group, the young man with a fan and the burly man called Uncle Chin made their way into the divine king's dwelling at a steady pace like they were taking a stroll. The young man looked around along the way as if he was interested in everything there. "Is this the divine King Duanmu's abode? But I don't look like much," the young man with a folding fan said in disappointment as he looked around. The middle-aged man didn't say anything. Instead, he cast his gaze into the depths of the immortal's cave and onto Jianchen. His previously ordinary eyes suddenly began to shine brightly. He has comprehended laws as an over-god, but his cultivation is only equivalent to a deity. What impressive talent this person has. However, his energy seems rather strange. It actually makes me feel blurry. He doesn't seem to practice a regular cultivation method, Uncle Chin murmured. "Uncle Chin, are you talking about that person called Jianchen? Even you say that his talent is amazing. It seems that this person does have some ability. I wonder how many years he has been cultivating." The young man gently fanned himself and said casually. Uncle Chin's expression became somewhat serious. However, in the end, he could not help but sigh in amazement. "Young master, I feel like this person hasn't even cultivated for 1,000 years. This is the first time I, Qin Zheng, have seen talent like this." The young man paused when he heard that. He stared at Uncle Chin in surprise and said in disbelief, "What? He hasn't even cultivated for 1,000 years? Doesn't that mean his talent is even greater than mine? Uncle Chin, are you sure you're not seeing things? There's such a great difference in cultivation between us, so I can see through many things with a single glance. Of course I'm not seeing things. He has indeed cultivated for an even shorter period of time than you, young master," said Qin Zheng. Joy immediately appeared on the young man's face. He said, "I heard him say that he's an independent cultivator who doesn't belong to any sect. Uncle Chin, we must rope him in. It's best if he joins our clan." Uncle Chin's eyes shone brighter and brighter. He immediately expanded the senses of his soul, enveloping all the regions in the divine king's dwelling that no longer had formations. Uncle Chin's soul naturally enveloped the sword comprehension building where Jianchen had comprehended the way of the sword earlier. However, none of the several dozen over-gods present sensed Uncle Chin's presence at all. None of them sensed it, including the late over-gods. In just a single moment, Uncle Chin's senses of his soul had discovered that Jianchen and the others had remained in the sword comprehension building for quite some time. He immediately became even happier and said, "Looks like he comprehended the way of the sword in the sword comprehension building. The marks left behind by Duanmu in the sword comprehension building aren't some impressive legacy, so it won't be easy to benefit from them. However, this person called Jianchen can use these marks to break through to Overgod. What great comprehension abilities! If we can really rope him in, it'll be a great merit. Since we want to rope him in, why don't we hurry up? Jianchen just happens to be in trouble. It's a great opportunity for us," the young man said rather eagerly. There's no hurry. We can use this opportunity to see his strength," said Qin Zheng. On the other side, the skinny, middle-aged man had already taken action. He wielded his spear, and the laws of wood condensed in the surroundings. He directly stabbed towards Genshin with the power of laws. The skinny man did not hold back at all. His gaze was cold as he directly stabbed towards Genshin's forehead, aiming for his vital point. A cold light flashed through Genshin's eyes the moment the skinny man stabbed out. With a thought, 2 finger-sized strands of profound sword chi appeared. Powerful sword chi permeated the surroundings, immediately causing the expressions of over half of the overgods present to change. Even the eyes of the late overgods narrowed suddenly. At that moment, everyone's expressions changed. All of their gazes were gathered on Genshin, or more accurately, they were gathered on the 2 strands of profound sword chi above Genshin's head. All of them felt threatened by the 2 strands of profound sword chi. The weaker they were, the greater the sense of threat they felt. The skinny, middle-aged man's expression changed drastically. Without any hesitation, his arm trembled, and he stabbed out with even more power. Swish! With a flash of silver light, one of the 2 strands of profound sword chi above Genshin's head had already shot out. It moved extremely quickly, surpassing the speed of lightning. It collided with the skinny man's spear in a single instance. Boom! A deafening boom erupted as the 2 of them clashed. The skinny middle-aged man only felt a tremendous force, which knocked his spear aside. His laws of wood were directly obliterated by the extremely sharp sword chi. The profound sword chi easily neutralized the attack. That was not all. After destroying the man's attack, the profound sword chi did not weaken at all. It continued to surge into the sky, radiating with a terrifying sword chi that shocked all the overgods present. It directly shot towards the skinny, middle-aged man's forehead under his shocked gaze. No. The skinny, middle-aged man roared out in fear. He was actually unable to dodge the incoming profound sword chi at all. All he could do was watch helplessly as the profound sword chi rapidly enlarged in his eyes and approached his forehead. Silently, the profound sword chi shot through the skinny, middle-aged man's forehead and emerged from the back of his head. The skinny, middle-aged man's eyes became stunned. There was still some lingering fear in his eyes. Under the attack of the profound sword chi, his soul failed to escape in time, resulting in the destruction of his soul. Chapter 1750. Boom! With a muffled sound, the skinny, middle-aged man's body fell straight to the ground. His eyes were still wide open, as if he had died with a grievance. Perhaps even he had never thought that Genshin, whom he did not take seriously, would possess such terrifying strength. He had actually been slain in a single clash by the profound sword chi, where even his soul could not escape in time. At that moment, the surroundings fell silent. Everyone stared at Genshin and the skinny, middle-aged man on the ground in disbelief. Their hearts churned. A few early overgods could not help but stagger backwards. Their gazes towards Genshin were filled with fear. In particular, when they noticed the second strand of profound sword chi hovering above Genshin's head, they all shivered from the bottom of their hearts. Genshin did not withdraw the second strand of profound sword chi immediately. The finger-sized strand of profound sword chi hovered above his head, radiating with surging sword chi as if it was warning all the overgods present. Ling Hogong gasped as well. His gaze towards Genshin underwent a drastic change. At the same time, he felt rather self-deprecating. Originally, he thought that Genshin was not the skinny, middle-aged man's opponent, so he wanted to help him out. However, looking at it now, Genshin did not need his help at all. He had slain an early overgod in a single clash. Ling Hogong was shocked by such strength. What is this? Is it a treasure? Is it a secret technique? Or is it some powerful battle skill? Are the two strands of sword chi left behind by the Divine King? The sword chi is definitely not the power left behind by the Divine King. I think it's probably some kind of powerful sword technique. A single strand of sword chi killed an early overgod instantly. If he used both strands at the same time, even mid-overgods would struggle to fend them off. Even late overgods would probably become heavily injured. The overgods in the surroundings conversed secretly. They discussed the profound sword chi intensely. Jianchen had already established his authority by killing the skinny, middle-aged man. Everyone present had witnessed Jianchen's strength. They knew that Jianchen was not someone to be trifled with. Jianchen knew that he possessed the ability to establish himself among the overgods, so he slowly withdrew the second strand of profound sword chi. He glanced around slowly and clasped his fist at everyone. Everyone, I don't know much about the Divine King's dwelling, so I'm willing to share what I know with you. Everyone's faces changed when they heard that. Jianchen is willing to share information about the Divine King's dwelling. I'm filled with admiration. Ling Tianho clasped his hands at Jianchen. I am Guhan Swallow. Greetings, Sir Jianchen. Once the matters in the Divine King's dwelling are resolved, I hope that Jianchen can visit my Guhan clan as a guest when you have the time. Although I don't comprehend the laws of the sword, I'm willing to exchange my cultivation experiences with Jianchen. Jianchen looked over. Guhan Swallow was an alluring beauty. She only seemed to be in her 20s. Haha, I also hope that Jianchen can visit my Feng family as a guest when you have the time. I, Feng Buell, have studied the laws of formations quite a bit. Although I can't discuss the laws of the sword with Jianchen like Ling Hogong. I like all the fine wine in the world, and I have a large collection. I just wonder if I have the honor of drinking with you, Jianchen, Feng Buell said with a smile. Feng Buell said with a smile. He claimed to be an old man, but in reality he looked like he was only in his 20s. He was handsome and dashing like a tree in the wind. However, Jianchen was not surprised at all because, even though some of the overgods present did not seem old, they were all old monsters who had cultivated for countless years. Some of the overgods in the surroundings immediately came over to befriend Jianchen. As an expert who had comprehended the laws of the sword, there were very few people who could defeat Jianchen unless they had also comprehended laws on the same level as the laws of the sword. Coupled with his powerful, profound sword chi, it was enough to make everyone tremble. They all came to befriend him with the thought that even if they could not become friends, it would be best if they did not become enemies. Jianchen returned their greetings. He gained a basic understanding of some of the overgods present from the conversation. None of them were simple people. However, he also knew that these people were so friendly right now because there was no conflict of interest between them. Once they ventured into the depths of the dwelling and fought over the treasures left behind by the divine King Duanmu, these people could become his opponents or even enemies at any time. Afterwards, Jianchen shared all the information he knew about the divine King Duanmu's dwelling. In reality, the information was not much of a secret. It was just some information about the situation in the dwelling, so the overgods could easily learn about it. When the overgods learnt that Jianchen had only obtained some of the items left behind by a disciple of the divine King Duanmu, they were naturally not interested at all. They were all ancestors of large clans, and they had all accumulated a great amount of wealth over the years. The only thing that truly interested them in the dwelling was the divine King Duanmu's legacy. They obviously did not care about the items left behind by his disciple. Currently, they had no idea that Jianchen had obtained a precious pill, like the soul recovery pill, from the pill storage room. Otherwise, it would have been very difficult for them to maintain their composure. With that, no one purposefully targeted Jianchen anymore. At the same time, due to the shocking strength that Jianchen had displayed, no one dared to provoke him for no reason, even though there was a huge difference between his cultivation and the comprehension of laws. The skinny middle-aged man was the best example. Afterwards, with Master Chanlong leading the way, everyone continued forward. Jianchen blended into the crowd as well, making his way to the depths of the dwelling with everyone. The space ring on the finger of the overgod he had killed naturally ended up in Jianshin's hands as well. Jianshin checked the space ring and discovered that although it was nowhere near as wealthy as the divine king Duanmu's disciple, it still contained quite a few divine crystals. There were low-grade, mid-grade, and high-grade divine crystals, as well as a few miscellaneous materials and pills. Jianshin stowed the space ring away casually and sent it to the Bright Moon Divine Hall silently. After giving some orders, he gave all the low-grade and mid-grade divine crystals to the people in the Divine Hall to cultivate. He kept the high-grade divine crystals for himself, planning on exchanging them for mid-grade divine crystals in the future. However, to Jianshin's surprise, Shangguanmu, I had already reached the peak of reciprocity after spending all these years in the Bright Moon Divine Hall absorbing divine crystals to cultivate. She was about to reach godhood, while everyone else's cultivation increased rapidly as well. Chapter 1751. Now, Shangguanmu, the White Tiger, and the seven-colored heaven-devouring beast progressed the fastest out of the group of people who had come to the saint's world with him. At the same time, they were the three most powerful people. As for Xiongzhong, he remained at early reciprocity. Moreover, Ruijin, Honglian, and Heiyu had all reached the origin realm as well. They had broken through receival and reached returnance. Although their rate of cultivation was not as fast as the White Tiger and the seven-colored heaven-devouring beast, they were still regarded as geniuses in the saint's world. Jianshin did not remain in the Bright Moon Divine Hall for long. After sending it into his space ring, he retreated. He looked at the overgods in the surroundings, and his gaze gradually became determined. He had already secretly made up his mind. Once he dealt with the matter with the Divine King, he would do his best to help the Mo clan establish themselves in the Dong and province. Once the Mo clan status stabilized, he would release the people in the Bright Moon Divine Hall so that they could cultivate in the Mo clan. He did not do this in the past because he was not powerful enough and he had offended the Liu family. However, the situation was different now. He was confident that his current strength was enough for him to gain a foothold in the divine kingdom of Pingtan. After all, there were only so many overgods in the divine kingdom of Pingtian. Even if the ancestors of the 5 provinces and the overgods in the royal capital were added together, there were only around a dozen of them. Moreover, most of them were early overgods. Everyone, please wait a moment. This formation is extremely powerful, so please allow me to study it. Master Chanlong's ancient voice rang out. He had already sat before the formation as mysterious inscriptions flickered on his 8 trigrams disc. The overgods in the surroundings all sat down and meditated with their eyes closed. Master Chanlong was the person with the greatest mastery over formations among everyone present, so the task of getting through the formation naturally fell to him. If it were not for the fact that Master Chanlong had found the crux of the formation, allowing them to directly attack the weak point of the formation, they would not have been able to enter the Divine King's dwelling, even with over 60 overgods gathered here. Jianshin looked at Master Chanlong as he studied. He also sat down silently. Fairy Haoyue had found the weak point of the formation earlier, but it was not fixed. Instead, it would constantly change as the formation operated, so he had no idea where it had moved to now. However, it was clearly not suitable for Fairy Haoyue to appear here with the current situation. Otherwise, once many overgods became interested in Fairy Haoyue, even he would not be able to protect her. As a result, he obviously could not rely on Fairy Haoyue to get through the formation. Many gods had already entered the entrance to the Divine King's dwelling. The path to the depths of the dwelling was already filled with overgods, so the gods naturally did not dare to approach it. Instead, they scattered in all directions to search for their own fortuitous encounters. In the end, many gods entered the cultivation grounds of the Divine King's descendants in an attempt to comprehend the markings there. Later on, there were even many deities who appeared here. Brother Jianshin, I heard that the people of the Mo clan and the Ando clan from the Dong and province have entered the dwelling ahead of time. is Brother Jianqin a part of our divine kingdom of Pingtian as well? Ling Hogong arrived beside Jianqin and asked politely as all the overgods meditated with their eyes closed. A few of the overgods in the surroundings immediately opened their eyes when they heard Ling Hogong's words. They all looked at Jianqin. I am not a part of the divine kingdom of Pingtian, but I can be considered half a part of it, Jianqin smiled. He had appeared in the territory of the divine kingdom of Pingtian as soon as he had arrived in the saint's world, so it was only natural that he referred to himself as half a part of the divine kingdom of Pingtian. You know Gu Hanyan and Feng Buell. This is Yu Jin, the ancestor of the Yu family from the Sublime Province. As he said that, Ling Hogong pointed at a white-haired old man. That's right. I never thought I would be right. Come, Jianqin, let me introduce you. You know Gu Hanyan and Feng Buell. This is Yu Jin, the ancestor of the Yu family from the Sublime Province. Eugene clasped his fist at Jianqin and smiled kindly. This is Bing Lu, the ancestor of the Yubing clan from the frigid Snow Province. Ling Hogong continued with the introductions to Jianqin. The hunchbacked old man, Bing Lu, nodded at Jianqin. He said with his ancient voice, Brother Jianqin, if you have the time in the future, you must come visit our Yubing clan. Jianqin returned the greeting with clasped hands. He planned on establishing himself in the divine kingdom of Pingtian in the future, so there was naturally no harm in befriending a few moreover gods who belonged to the divine kingdom of Pingtian. Afterwards, Ling Hogong introduced a few moreover gods to Jianqin. They were all the people who had opened their eyes earlier. They all belonged to the divine kingdom of Pingtian. Jianqin knew quite a few of the overgods already, so he understood that Ling Hogong was introducing them to him one by one to tie him to the divine kingdom of Pingtian. It was equivalent to forming a faction so that he could fend off the overgods from other divine kingdoms. This was because none of them wanted to see Duanmu divine king's belongings end up in the hands of other divine kingdoms. After all, Duanmu divine king's dwelling was within the divine kingdom of Pingtian. Brother Jianqin, I hope we can all work together when we fight for the treasures later on. Once we obtain the treasures, we'll split them according to our contributions. I wonder if Brother Jianqin is willing to join us? A voice that only the overgods from the divine kingdom of Pingtian could hear rang out in Jianqin's head. Jianqin knew that the speaker was a middle-aged man called Yang Kai. He was an overgod from the royal capital of the divine kingdom of Pingtian, and he was also the strongest overgod in the divine kingdom of Pingtian. He was a late overgod. Since Senior Yang Kai has spoken, how can I turn you down? Moreover, there are many overgods here. If we all fight for ourselves, we probably won't be able to obtain anything in the end. If we can work together, that'll naturally be for the best. Jianqin also replied secretly, agreeing to Yang Kai's suggestion. The overgods from the divine kingdom of Pingtian all beamed. They had already witnessed Jianqin's strength. Killing early overgods was no problem at all, and he could even threaten mid-overgods. He was much more powerful than many of them. With his participation, their strength would increase by a lot. Time passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, a month had already passed since Master Chanlong began studying the formation. I've found the core of the formation. Everyone, it's up to you now. Master Chanlong's voice finally rang out after a month of studying the formation. All the overgods, including Jianqin, stood up when they heard that. They attacked the location Master Chanlong pointed at the same time. Jianqin could tell with a single glance that Master Chanlong's method of getting through the formation was completely different from Fairy Haiyue's. The weakness that Fairy Haiyue pointed out was the weakest part of the formation. It would constantly shift as the formation operated, while the weakness that Master Chanlong found was the core of the formation. It was basically fixed there, never moving at all. Under the attacks of over 60 overgods, the formation collapsed very quickly. Although the divine King Duanmu was powerful, He only possessed extraordinary mastery over the laws of space and the sword. His mastery over formations was not great either. Although the formations he cast down had reached the level of the divine King Duanmu, they were of a lower level. Now that Master Chanlong was present, and there were over 60 overgods. Getting through the divine King Duanmu's formations was naturally nothing difficult. Afterwards, they got through formation after formation. In just a year, they arrived in the depths of the dwelling where the divine King Duanmu cultivated. Chapter 1752. The divine King Duanmu's dwelling seemed extremely simple. It was not overly ostentatious, nor were there extravagant decorations. There were only 3 stone huts that seemed extremely ordinary. Aside from that, there was nothing else. It was very difficult to imagine that this was the dwelling of a divine king, let alone a supreme divine king. This was because everything seemed just too ordinary. It was even worse than some of the smaller clans that only had gods. There were only 3 stone huts that stood alone in the dwelling of a mighty divine king. This clearly surprised the overgods. In their eyes, the divine King Duanmu's dwelling would naturally be majestic and resplendent with treasures everywhere as a supreme divine king. However, there were only 3 stone huts before them. The stone huts were constructed from the most ordinary materials in the saints' world. They were not particularly precious. Time had already left behind indelible marks on them, and they were not protected by any formations either. Is this really where the divine King Duanmu cultivates? Have we come to the wrong place? An early overgod asked from the crowd. He was the ancestor of a large clan in the divine kingdom of Qingyang. He was not the only one who had such doubts. All the overgods present had the same thought. The dwelling of the divine King Duanmu was just too shabby. It was even worse than theirs. It was very difficult to believe that the mighty divine King Duanmu would actually cultivate in a place like this. Master Chanlong looked around and said, "This is already the very depths of the dwelling. This must be where the divine King Duanmu lives. It can't be wrong." Master Chanlong had played a huge role along the way. Without him, the overgods would not have been able to enter the dwelling at all. As a result, Master Chanlong had already become a person of great prestige among the overgods. Every single word and action of his carried great weight. Without a doubt, he had confirmed that the 3 stone huts were where the divine King Duanmu cultivated. The light in the eyes of many of the overgods flickered. They looked around cautiously as the senses of their souls flooded the surroundings, enveloping the entire space. Although they were unable to penetrate the stone huts, they were able to confirm that there were no formations here. All the overgods became restless. They looked at the 3 stone huts with burning interest, but none of them dared to take action. Instead, they all looked at Master Chanlong cautiously. This was because they understood that although they had not sensed the existence of formations, there was no guarantee that there were no hidden formations that they could not sense. Master Chanlong did not move, so they did not dare to move either. Master Chanlong closed his eyes. The 8 trigrams disc in his hand shone with black and white light as a huge Taiji diagram revolved around him. Mysterious inscriptions flickered around him. A while later, Master Chanlong opened his eyes. Excitement flashed through his eyes. Even though he hid it very quickly, all the overgods present paid attention to his every move at all times. Naturally, he was unable to hide his sudden change from them. "Everyone, please wait for a moment. Please allow me to explore the path ahead." "I'll lead the way," Master Chanlong said to everyone like nothing had happened. The 8 trigrams disc hovered above his head and shone with resplendent light. Afterwards, Master Chanlong took the lead. The overgods followed closely behind Master Chanlong as the light in their eyes flickered. At this moment, Master Chanlong suddenly sped up. He turned into a blur as he charged towards the first stone hut. Every single action of Master Chanlong's affected everyone. When they saw Master Chanlong suddenly speed up, a gleam of light flashed through the eyes of the overgods behind him. Without any hesitation, they sped up as well, turning into blurs as they charged towards the first stone hut as quickly as they could. Jianchen was no exception. He was about to charge towards the first stone hut as well, but as soon as he moved, Fairy Haoyue's voice rang out in his head. "Don't go." It was just a short word, but it made Jianchen shiver inside. As he watched the overgods in the surroundings charge towards the first stone hut one by one, he stopped without any hesitation. At the same time, he communicated with Ling Hogong and the other overgods secretly. Ling Hogong and the other overgods were all stunned when they heard Jianchen's message. Ling Hogong immediately stopped, while the other overgods did not listen to Jianchen and stop immediately. However, they did slow down slightly. Just as everyone was about to charge into the first stone hut, Master Qianlong, who was at the very front, smiled. He came to a sudden halt before retreating even faster. It was also at this moment that space cracked open silently. A huge streak of light that was several dozen meters long emerged, cleaving down towards everyone with surging sword qi. The sudden change in situation caused the expressions of all the overgods to change drastically. They could no longer be bothered to curse Master Qianlong for being devious. All of them stopped and retreated even faster. Not everyone managed to escape. Over a dozen overgods were trapped by the sword qi, having been immobilized by the powerful sword intent. They were unable to retreat as they faced the sword qi. All they could do was endure it forcefully. The overgods were all battle-hardened. They all bellowed out at the same time and used their full strength to attack the sword qi. They tried to disperse the sword qi by combining their strength. However, the sword qi had been left behind by the supreme divine, King Duanmu, when he was still alive. It was so powerful that even divine kings struggled to endure it, let alone overgods like them. The huge sword qi destroyed the full-powered attacks from over a dozen overgods in an unstoppable manner. It slashed down as a resplendent streak of light. A total of 8 overgods had been reduced to ashes, silently. Even their flesh and blood had disappeared. The other overgods stood near the edge of the sword qi, so they were not directly struck by the sword qi. They managed to survive out of luck. However, even with that being the case, they all vomited blood. They were heavily injured, and 3 of them only had a small portion of their bodies left. They were extremely heavily injured. Master Qianlong, you're despicable. The overgods who managed to survive became furious. They all cursed at Master Qianlong before immediately ingesting a large number of healing pills to recover. Chapter 1753. Master Qianlong sighed and said, sorrowfully, I didn't sense that the divine King Duanmu had actually left something like that behind. If I hadn't reacted in time, I probably would have died to the sword qi as well. I am deeply sorry for what has happened to the others. Master Qianlong, I think you just want to kill all of us here so that you can enjoy the divine King Duanmu's legacy for yourself, Yang Kai said coldly. He was a late overgod, so he did not fear Master Qianlong at all. Master Qianlong said innocently, You've all misunderstood me. That's not what I meant at all. Moreover, I've said before that I was only scouting ahead. I didn't say it would be safe. You were the ones who followed me. The overgods were momentarily at a loss for words when they heard that. Master Qianlong was indeed telling the truth. They were the only ones to blame. However, everyone's attitude towards Master Qianlong changed slightly after what had happened this time. They all became cautious and no longer trusted him as much as before. Master Qianlong did not care about this at all. The temptation of what the divine King Duanmu had left behind was just too great. His reputation was nothing compared to that. Brother Jianchen, thank you. Ling Hogong's grateful voice rang out in Jianchen's head. Afterwards, the other overgods of the divine kingdom of Pingtian expressed their gratitude to Jianchen as well. If it were not for Jianchen's warning, they might have been one of the people who had died to the strand of sword qi. Brother Jianqin, how did you know there would be danger up ahead? Yang Kai asked secretly. Senior Yang Kai thinks too highly of me. How would I know there would be danger up ahead? I just felt like entering the 3 stone huts was a little too simple, Jianqin replied. Naturally, the other overgods of the divine kingdom of Pingtian heard what Jianqin said. Sigh, it's still Brother Jianqin who's calm. We were a little too rash before. We failed to resist the temptation of the treasures left behind by the divine King Duanmu. Our greed disturbed our vigilance, Bing Lu sighed gently. They clearly understood Jianqin's logic. They had all been tempted by the treasures in the stone huts before. Coupled with the provocation from the overgods in the surroundings, they had lost their usual composure. Jianqin said nothing. Instead, he stared at where the sword Qi had landed sternly. His heart was in turmoil. He had personally witnessed the 8 overgodses being reduced to nothingness under the sword Qi that was enough to cause everyone's expressions to change. Not even their space rings behind. The only reason why the other overgods had managed to survive was because they were near the edge. They had not been struck directly by the sword Qi, or they would have died as well. Is this the Divine King's strength? Even Duanmu, who hasn't made it onto the Divine King's throne, is so powerful. Just how terrifying are Aladona and Protector Shui, the strongest Divine King among the Divine King's throne. Jianqin thought. He could not help but think of Aladona and Protector Shui he had met on the Tianyuan continent. The 2 of them were experts who had made it onto the Divine King's throne. They were much more powerful than Duanmu. In particular, Protector Shui ranked 9th on the Divine King's throne. In the past, Jianqin found Aladona and Protector Shui to be unfathomable when he faced them. Even though he knew that they were at the level of the Divine King, he had no idea how powerful the Divine King was. Only now did he truly understand just how terrifying Aladona and Protector Shui were when he compared them to Duanmu's sword Qi. In his eyes, overgods were already experts who could reign over an entire region. There were only around a dozen overgods in a divine kingdom, yet they were so fragile before the Divine King's sword Qi. Calling them ants was not an exaggeration at all. Everyone, I'm going to continue scouting, said Jianqin at this moment. The inscriptions on the disc in his hand flickered rapidly before it hovered before Master Qianlong. Master Qianlong stared at the disc as he formed seals with his hands. He made his way towards the stone huts as he studied. Due to the lesson from before, no one trusted Master Qianlong as much as before. As a result, no one followed Master Qianlong when they saw Master Qianlong scout. They were afraid that Master Qianlong would set them up again. After all, no one here could match Master Qianlong in terms of formations. If Master Qianlong really wanted to use the formations here to deal with them, it would be very difficult for them to sense it. Under everyone's gazes, Master Qianlong drew closer and closer to the first stone hut. When Master Qianlong arrived where he had been before, there was no sword Qi hidden in the air. Clearly, there was only one strand of sword Qi from before. In the end, Master Qianlong arrived before the stone hut successfully. He slowly placed his hand on the stone door, and with a gentle push, the stone door immediately opened. Master Qianlong beamed as he entered in a flash. He's gone, and just like that. The several dozen overgods outside were stunned when they saw Master Qianlong vanish from the stone hut. They struggled to believe that Master Qianlong had entered the stone hut so easily. However, they returned to their senses soon after. Without any hesitation, they all charged into the stone hut. This time, they did not encounter any obstructions. Clearly, there was only one strand of sword Qi from before. Jianchen, Ling Hogong, and the other overgods from the divine kingdom of Pingtian entered the stone hut as well. When Jianchen entered the stone hut, the landscape before him suddenly changed. He had already appeared in an extremely large space. Around him were the several dozen overgods who had entered the stone hut before him. Although the stone hut only seemed to be around a dozen square meters wide from the outside, the divine King Duanmu had clearly modified the inside with the laws of space. It was a completely different world. "That's liquid rock." Suddenly, someone cried out. In front of everyone, at a position close to the mountain rock, there was a small pit that was only the size of a wash basin. It was filled with a pool of milky white liquid that emitted a refreshing fragrance. It really is stalactite milk. For divine crystal experts, stalactite milk has the effect of purifying impurities in their bodies and condensing their origin energy. It can also suppress all kinds of pill toxins and remove the resistance formed by consuming large amounts of heavenly and earthly treasures. It's extremely precious. That's not all. If you use liquid rock on people below godhood, just a single droplet will be enough for them to undergo a complete transformation. It can also increase their ability to comprehend, allowing them to comprehend the laws of the world much more easily. The effects of the stalactite are not limited to those below deities. It's still effective even to over-gods. Some high-quality stalactite can even help god kings to a certain extent. Its value is immeasurable. The only flaw is that the effects of the stalactite are only temporary. Once the effects wear off, the effects of the stalactite will return to normal. There's such a large basin of liquid rock here. There's over 1,000 droplets, at the very least. Like I said, how can the mighty divine King Duanmu be so stingy? The appearance of the basin of liquid rock caused the eyes of all the overgods present to turn red. Afterwards, they all charged over excitedly. Before they had even arrived, they had already taken out various jade bottles to store the liquid rock. Everyone wanted liquid rock, but at the same time, none of them wished for someone else to obtain it first. The people at the very front naturally became the targets of everyone behind them. Chapter 1754. The expression of the late over-god who had comprehended the laws of wind at the very front changed drastically. Even though he was one of the few late over-gods in the group, he would probably become heavily injured if he had to face the attacks of several dozen experts at the same time. He might even die here. This was because a few of the attacks came from other late over-gods. The liquid rock was precious, but no matter how precious it was insignificant compared to his life. At that moment, the person who had comprehended the laws of wind had also comprehended the laws of wind. The late over-god at the very front did not hesitate at all. He immediately gave up on the idea of taking the liquid rock. With a single movement, he left behind an afterimage where he was, appearing several hundred meters away, dodging the attacks. With his departure, the people at the very front became Yang Kai, Master Chanlong, and the 5 other late over-gods. The 7 of them basically moved at the same time, charging towards the liquid rock with lightning speed. The liquid rock was effective on over-gods as well. What truly caught their attention was the liquid rock's ability to increase comprehension. This was because an increase in comprehension would be extremely beneficial to comprehending the laws of the world, allowing them to achieve twice the results with half the effort. If they were lucky, they might even be able to use it to reach the level of the Divine King. It was just that stalactite milk was very rare and its price was extremely high. Almost all of them were monopolized by those large clans and sects that were far more powerful than them, so it was very difficult for them to buy it. At this moment, such a large basin of stalactite milk had appeared here, so they were naturally very moved. In their eyes, the liquid rock was an opportunity for them to reach the level of the Divine King. Even though the chances were very slim, it was still fatally attractive to them. Powerful origin energy and pulses of laws wreaked havoc in the surroundings. The several dozen mid and early overgods behind all struck out at that moment as well. They sent powerful attacks towards the 7 late overgods at the very front in an attempt to stop them. Ling Tianho struck out as well. He swung his sword and sent out a huge sword chi that directly shot towards Master Chanlong. The situation was chaotic. At a moment like this, no one cared about whether you were a mid or late overgod. All they cared about was the great benefits and the temptation of the liquid rock. The 7 overgods at the very front all used their protective treasures to block the attacks from behind. They did not slow down at all, and instead sped up. A formation disc appeared above Master Chanlong's head. It was immediately activated, forming a powerful defensive formation that protected him. The formation continued to envelop him, moving with him. With a string of heavy sounds, the attacks from the several dozen overgods landed on the 7 late overgods at the very front, causing their protective treasures and formations to dim. Aside from Master Chanlong, the others all paled. Every single one of them had received attacks from several experts at the same level as them. Even with protective treasures, it was very difficult for them to remain unscathed. However, the 7 late overgods did not slow down at all after receiving the attack from behind. Instead, they converted the force of the attack into forward momentum, moving even faster. They arrived before the stone basin with the stalactites in a single instance. However, the basin was only the size of a wash basin. While there were 7 of them, it was impossible for the basin to hold so many people. As a result, in order for them to approach the basin and collect the liquid rock, they all struck out at the same time. They attacked the people beside them in an attempt to force back their competitors. When an overgod struck out, it caused a great disturbance. When the terrifying ripples of energy swept towards the stone basin with the stalactites, the ordinary stone basin immediately shattered. The milky white stalactites were blown into the air by the turbulent streams of energy, turning into over 100 balls of milky white liquid of various sizes. As the ripples of energy spread out, they scattered in all directions like flowers scattered by a goddess. Hurry up and grab the liquid rock. It belongs to whoever grabs it. Someone cried out. At that moment, no one paid any more attention to the late overgods. They all scattered in all directions as their eyes burned with desire. They chased after the scattered stalactites as quickly as they could. Various jade bottles appeared in their hands as well. The late overgod who had comprehended the laws of wind was the fastest. No one could match him in terms of speed. In the blink of an eye, he collected 3 balls of liquid rock, which amounted to over 20 droplets. Jianqin looked around as well, and his eyes narrowed very soon. He was overjoyed. 2 balls of liquid rock, one large and one small, flew straight towards him. 3 overgods rapidly approached the 2 balls of liquid rock from behind. To no surprise, their targets were the 2 balls of liquid rock as well. Jianqin charged over without any hesitation. He pushed his speed to the limit, and with a flip of his hand, a jade bottle appeared. He directly sucked the 2 balls of liquid rock into it. The eyes of the 3 overgods, who originally wanted to collect the 2 balls of liquid rock, turned cold. They glared at Jianqin, but they did not collect the other balls of liquid rock. Instead, they continued in the same direction, directly surrounding Jianqin. They had their eyes on the larger ball of liquid rock that Jianqin had collected. Just that one ball was equivalent to 4 or 5 balls of liquid rock. A cold light flickered through Jianqin's eyes when he sensed their actions. With a thought, 2 strands of profound sword qi immediately appeared, radiating with surging sword qi. The sword qi was so powerful that all the overgods present raised their eyebrows. They looked at Jianqin with a sliver of fear. It had already been a year since Jianqin last used the profound sword qi. During that year, the power of Jianqin's soul had recovered to its peak, so he could use the 2 strands of profound sword qi again. With the appearance of the profound sword qi, the expressions of the 3 overgods who charged towards Jianqin suddenly changed. They all came to a halt as fear filled their eyes. 2 of the 3 overgods were early overgods, while one was a mid-overgod. However, as Jianqin used the profound sword qi, they no longer dared to approach Jianqin. Jianqin did not shoot out the profound sword qi. Instead, he tossed it above his head to deter the people in the surroundings. Afterwards, he clasped his hands at the three overgods and said, "I only want these 2 balls of liquid rock. There's still some liquid rock in the surroundings that hasn't been collected. If you keep wasting time here, you might end up empty-handed." The 3 overgods secretly weighed the pros and cons. In the end, they did not take the risk of stealing from Jianchen. They split up and went to collect the remaining liquid rock in the surroundings. In just a few seconds, the basin of liquid rock had been emptied out. Naturally, the late overgods had collected the most. In particular, the late overgod who had comprehended the laws of wind seemed to have collected around 50 droplets. Of course, not everyone benefited. There were still a few weaker overgods who were empty-handed. They failed to collect a single droplet, and they were even heavily injured when they fought for the liquid rock. Their faces were pale right now. The overgods who had been injured by God King Duanmu's sword Qi were still injured, so they ended up empty-handed when they fought for the stalactites. Their faces were all extremely sunken. Jianchen stowed the jade bottle of liquid rock away in satisfaction. Although he had not obtained a lot of liquid rock, he was still very satisfied with around 20 droplets. He understood that the only way he could deal with overgods was with profound sword Qi. If he shot out both strands of profound sword Qi, he would not be the overgod's opponent at all. It was already quite impressive for him to be able to collect around 20 droplets. Chapter 1755. After all the stalactites were taken away, everyone dispersed. They began to search for their own fortuitous encounters, searching every inch of the world. The overgods of the divine kingdom of Pingtian also dispersed in groups of 2s and 3s, heading off in different directions. However, Ling Hogong took the initiative to walk with Jianchen, discussing the way of the sword with him. Jianchen and Ling Hogong discussed their cultivation experiences as they searched for the depths of the space. Although they both possessed the senses of their souls, there are some things that could evade the senses of their souls. They could only be discovered when they were close enough. Boom! At this moment, a rumble rang out in the distance. An intense battle had already erupted there. Over a dozen overgods fought, and more people joined in. There were even 3 late overgods who fought in an earth-shattering manner. It's the chaotic heavens sword style. Someone has obtained the chaotic heavens sword style. Vaguely, there was an explosive roar that came from afar, accompanied by a deafening roar. The chaotic heavens sword style? Jianchen murmured. Clearly, this was the first time he had heard of it. However, a gleam of light flashed through Ling Hogong's eyes. He became slightly covetous as he said, "The chaotic heavens sword style is the cultivation method that the divine king Duanmu practiced. The divine king even used it to comprehend the way of the sword. It's not just the cultivation method. It also records various sword techniques with astonishing power. It's said that the chaotic heavens sword style was created by a primordial realm expert. I never thought it would appear here." As they spoke, the battle in the distance became more and more intense. 5 late overgods had already taken part, including Yang Kai from the divine kingdom of Pingtian. For the sake of obtaining the chaotic heavens sword style, they fought in an earth-shattering manner. Many people were bloodied and heavily injured. Originally, a mid-overgod had obtained the chaotic heavens sword style, but he immediately faced the combined attacks of 5 late overgods. In the end, the mid-overgod directly died there. His soul was wiped out, and the chaotic heavens sword style ended up in the hands of a late overgod. However, as soon as the late overgod obtained the chaotic heavens sword style, he was surrounded by everyone and became heavily injured in a single instance. In the end, he tossed out several defensive formation discs and blew up his weapon before breaking out of the encirclement. He fled with his heavy injuries. Suddenly, an azure figure shot over from afar. It moved extremely quickly, catching up to the late overgod with the chaotic heavens sword style in a single instance. While he was unprepared, it directly impaled his head before grabbing the chaotic heavens sword style and fleeing. It left the miniature world in the blink of an eye, preventing the other late over-gods from catching up. Ao Tong, when you get out, don't even think about having peace. Someone bellowed from behind, full of unwillingness. To no surprise, the person who had taken the chaotic heavens sword style was the late over-god who had comprehended the laws of wind. Jianqin was shocked when he saw this from afar. A late over-god had actually died, just like that. This was the first late over-god to die in the divine king's dwelling. At this moment, the world began to shake violently. The sky collapsed and the ground cracked. Violent laws of space wreaked havoc in the surroundings, causing the world to shake violently. The space in the distance was reduced to nothingness at a visible rate. The space there actually vanished as if it had been devoured by a terrifying beast. It was a shocking sight. Oh no, the world is about to collapse. This world has existed for far too long. Without the support of the divine king's laws of space, it can't endure the attacks at all. Flee or it'll be reduced to nothingness like the space here. It'll be difficult to escape death, the overgods all cried out. They all flew towards the exit as quickly as they could. Jianqin and Ling Hogong fled as quickly as they could as well. They made their way towards the exit as quickly as they could. Large swathes of space collapsed behind them, reduced to nothingness. Spatial cracks filled the surroundings. It was extremely terrifying. The space collapsed extremely quickly. It basically tailed behind Jianqin and Ling Hogong. If the two of them had been slightly slower, they would have been devoured mercilessly. Further away, two early overgods were further away from the exit. Coupled with the fact that they flew rather slowly, they directly vanished into the collapsed space under Jianqin and Ling Hogong's gazes. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. Jianqin and Ling Hogong secretly gritted their teeth. They had already pushed their speed to the limit. They seemed to have turned into a faint blur as they charged towards the exit quickly. Jianqin was secretly prepared to use the linear lightning release at any time. Fortunately, the two of them arrived at the exit safely in the end. They entered in a single instance and vanished from the collapsed world. Outside of the 3 stone houses, only 2 were left. The first stone house had already turned into a pile of ashes. A few more overgods gathered outside the hut had been reduced as well. Aside from the mid and late overgods who had died in the battle for the chaotic heavens sword style, there were 4 other overgods who had failed to escape from the collapsed space and time. Their whereabouts were unknown. Ao Tong really isn't outside. It looks like he's left divine King Duanmu's dwelling with the chaotic heavens sword style. A deep voice rang out. It came from a late overgod who had taken part in the battle for the chaotic heavens sword style. It's his fault for comprehending the laws of wind. If he wants to leave, we really can't stop him, Yang Kai added as well. His face was extremely sunken. It was said that the chaotic heavens sword style had been created by a primordial realm expert. It was an unimaginable treasure to these overgods. It was enough to affect the future of their clans, so all of them wanted it. At this moment, a heavy smell of blood suddenly appeared, causing the overgods who had just emerged from the first hut to frown. When they looked in the direction of the smell, they saw that over 100 corpses had already littered the second and third huts. The corpses were incomplete, and all of them had died in extremely miserable states. They had either lost half of their bodies or their heads. However, the missing parts of their bodies seemed to have vanished into thin air. They were nowhere to be found. "These heavenly deities are truly daring," said an overgod coldly when he saw that. The corpses lying on the ground were all heavenly gods. These heavenly gods took advantage of the time when they entered the first stone hut to boldly enter the second and third stone huts. Chapter 1756. This time, no one doubted Master Chanlong because the handprints on the stone door clearly indicated that someone had entered. Perhaps the killing move that the Divine King had cast down here could only be used once. The first stone hut was the best example. The remaining overgods all entered the second stone hut. The second stone hut also possessed a space within. It had been modified by the Divine King with the laws of space, so it was much larger than the first hut. This space was covered by mountains. As far as the eye could see, it was an endless mountain range. Sharp sword chi was emitted from the mountain range, bringing with it an aura of supremacy. It was extremely powerful. Between the endless mountains were a few stone walls that were as smooth as mirrors. The stone walls were covered with slashes, and the sharp sword chi that filled the world originated from the slashes. The sharpness was enough to make all the over-gods present shiver in fear. There were already a few gods standing in groups of 2s and 3s in front of some of the slashed walls. They stared at the slashes, wanting to comprehend the way of the sword within. A series of rumbling sounds rang out, only to see that in front a few heavenly deities had already been hacked at the mountain peak here, wanting to peel off the sword scars and bring them away. However, the mountain here had been contaminated by the sword chi for many years, so it had already undergone a qualitative transformation. It was abnormally tough. Even with their full strength, they could only leave a mark on it. It was basically impossible to cut off the mountain and take it away. This should be where the Divine King comprehended the sword chi, said Ling Hogong. Ling Hogong said. His eyes were filled with excitement. This place was basically a supreme land of treasure to him. This was because he comprehended the laws of the sword. If he comprehended the laws of the sword here, he would be able to achieve twice the results with half the effort. The light in Jianshan's eyes flickered as well. He was excited. The slashes contained the Divine King's comprehension of the laws of the sword, so they would be of great help to him. They could assist him in increasing his comprehension of the laws of the sword, allowing him to reach the partial achievement of sword spirit in an even shorter amount of time. The over-gods retreated very quickly. They had already scouted everything here. This was only a place where God King Duanmu comprehended the sword. It was of no use to them at all, nor were there any treasures left behind. Naturally, they were not interested in this place. In the blink of an eye, all the over-gods had retreated aside from Jianshan and Ling Tianho. Jianshan, we both comprehend the laws of the sword, so this place is basically a paradise for us. Why don't we cultivate here for a while? Ling Hogong said. He already had thoughts of staying here. Jianshan, leave immediately and go to the third hut. If I've guessed correctly, there's what I need in there. At this moment, Fairy Haoyue's voice rang out in Jianshan's head. Jianshan clasped his fist at Ling Tianho without any change in his expression. He said, "There's only one left out of the 3 huts. There might be some impressive treasures in there, so I plan on trying my luck and seeing if I can find anything." Ling Hogong clasped his fist at Jianshan and said, "I won't be going to the 3rd hut. I'll be cultivating here for a while. I hope my laws of the sword will improve. Jianshan, good luck." Jianshan left after bidding farewell to Ling Hogong. He looked at the 3rd hut. The corpses of gods littered the ground outside the 3rd hut. Every single one of them had been dismembered, and they had died horrible deaths. Jianshan glanced past the corpses casually. Suddenly his eyes narrowed, and his gaze landed on a person's face. He just happened to recognize the dead god. He was the mid-god from the Wainer clan who had hurried over when he, Emo Ling, and Ando Fu opened the Divine King's dwelling. There was a second person that Jianshan was familiar with lying nearby. It was the second mid-god from the Wainer clan. I never thought that 2 mid-gods from the Wainer clan would die here. Jianshan sighed inside. He felt great pity. Afterwards, he made his way past the corpses and entered the 3rd hut. The 3rd hut was much smaller than the first 2 huts. When Jianshan entered, he discovered that all the over-gods had stopped there. They all stared ahead with mixed feelings. Jianshan followed their gazes, and his eyes narrowed suddenly. His expression immediately became mixed as well. There was admiration and pity. Before them was a middle-aged man in green robes. His eyes were closed as he sat on a jade pedestal quietly. Although invisible, sword chi vaguely radiated from him, making him seem like he was supreme. He was completely lifeless. The divine king Duanmu. Jianchen was filled with mixed feelings when he saw the middle-aged man. The divine king Duanmu was a peak expert who had made it onto the divine king's throne. Even though he was not ranked among the divine kings, his strength was enough to shock the world. There were very few people who were his opponent in the divine king's realm, yet now, such a great expert had died in his own dwelling. Moreover, the reason why his laws of the sword had reached sword spirit was all thanks to the divine King Duanmu's assistance. If it were not for the sword slash that the divine King Duanmu had left behind in his disciples' dwelling, it would have been impossible for him to reach sword spirit so easily. I never thought that the third hut would actually be where the divine King Duanmu sleeps. Master Chanlong looked at the lifeless divine King Duanmu with mixed feelings. He sighed gently in pity. The divine King Duanmu was extremely powerful. Probably only the experts who made it onto the divine king's throne could defeat him, but they would only be able to defeat him. The divine king Duanmu had grasped the way of space. If he wanted to escape, he would be even faster than the laws of wind. Killing him would be even more difficult. The divine King Duanmu is so powerful, so who killed him? Was it one of the peak experts who stood before the divine king? Or was it a primordial realm expert? If a primordial realm expert took action, it would indeed be very difficult for the divine King Duanmu to escape. What a pity! What a pity! If the divine King Duanmu didn't die, there would be a very great chance for him to reach the primordial realm in the future. He would stand above the clouds, above the 9 heavens. A few of the overgods sighed. Their gazes towards the divine King Duanmu were filled with admiration. This was admiration for the strong. Even though the divine King Duanmu was already dead, the fame he had left behind still affected them. There seems to be a small line of words beside the divine King Duanmu. An overgod suddenly said in surprise. Everyone looked over, and sure enough, they discovered a line of words carved into the ground. Since you've made it here, it's fate. If you want my legacy, you must swear to the laws of the world that you must personally kill the vice leader of the heavenly demon religion. Huayan, if you succeed in cultivation in the future. The expressions of all the overgods changed again and again when they saw the line of words. In particular, when they saw the words heavenly demon religion, all of their faces became filled with fear as if they were extremely fearful and fearful of the heavenly demon religion. Chapter 1757. Jianchen murmured and sighed when he saw everyone's expressions. Although he had never heard of the heavenly demon religion, the heavenly demon religion was probably an impressive organization from the reactions of the overgods present. At that moment, the surroundings fell into a strange silence. All the overgods looked at the group of people before the divine king. The light in their eyes flickered as they became uneasy. Even further away, there were still some Empyrean gods gathered there. They were all people who had arrived here before the master gods. However, ever since the several dozen overgods entered the third stone hut, the people who were only gods retreated far away. They did not dare to approach the hut at all. A while later, an overgod finally sighed gently. I never thought that the divine King Duanmu would actually die to the hands of the vice leader of the heavenly demon religion, Huayan. Moreover, if you want Duanmu Divine King's legacy, you have to defy the laws of the world and become enemies with the vice leader of the heavenly demon religion. Another overgod shook his head as well. He said gently, if that's the case, as long as you obtain the divine King Duanmu's legacy, you'll be hunted down by the heavenly demon religion. Who would be bold enough to take the legacy? I'd rather not obtain the divine King Duanmu's legacy than become enemies with the heavenly demon religion, as that would only lead to death. The heavenly demon religion is just too terrifying. It's not something we can provoke. All the overgods sighed. They were filled with pity. All of them feared the heavenly demon religion very much. They did not dare to accept the divine King Duanmu's legacy at all. Do we have to become enemies with the heavenly demon religion to obtain the divine King Duanmu's legacy? The divine King Duanmu is already dead anyway. Can't we take the legacy from a dead person with our strength as over-gods? A middle-aged man in red robes spoke. Clearly, he wanted to go against the rules that the divine King Duanmu had set down before he died and use force. The light in the eyes of many over-gods immediately flickered when they heard what the person had said. Clearly, they were rather tempted. The divine King Duanmu was indeed admirable when he was alive, but the rules he set down were just too difficult. Basically, no one dared to agree to it. Instead of leaving the divine King Duanmu's legacy here, why don't we take the legacy with us and leave it here? Why don't we take him out with us so that he can continue to flourish and make a name for himself in the saints' world? Perhaps there really is a sliver of hope for him to avenge God King Duanmu in the future. With that, he took out a low-quality saint artifact, flying sword from his space ring. He bowed towards the divine King Duanmu's corpse politely and said sternly, "Duanmu, divine king, forgive me." The old man shot out the low-quality saint artifact in his hand. Swish! The low-quality saint artifact directly shot towards the divine King Duanmu's corpse as a silver streak of light. The light in the eyes of all the over-gods present shone brightly as they stared at the flying sword. At the same time, they secretly accumulated power. Once they confirmed that there was no danger, they would charge over as quickly as they could. The flying sword moved extremely quickly, arriving 3 meters away from the divine King Duanmu in a single instance. However, it was also at this moment that a terrifying power of laws suddenly appeared. It formed a huge barrier of light that enveloped the corpse. When the low-quality saint artifact came in contact with the power of laws, it actually shattered silently. At the same time, the divine King Duanmu's corpse became fainter and fainter under the power of laws. His corpse changed drastically at that moment as well. The green-robed, middle-aged man had vanished. To no surprise, all that remained was a set of white bones. There was a space ring on one of his fingers, and there was a pearl the size of a pigeon's egg in his head. It flickered with dim, golden light. The divine King Duanmu had already been dead for several 100,000 years. His body had already rotted away. He had only used an ability to preserve an image of himself before he died. Once the ability was destroyed, the true state of his corpse would naturally be exposed. The power of laws that had suddenly appeared had clearly destroyed the image of the divine King Duanmu. A golden core of laws. It's a golden core of laws. The expressions of all the over-gods changed the moment they saw the pearl. They could not help but cry out. They were extremely shocked. As for the interspatial ring, no one paid any attention to it because it was within their expectations. A golden core of laws. It said that only when one's comprehension of the laws of the world has reached an extremely deep level can they condense a golden core of laws. At the same time, a golden core of laws is the symbol of a primordial realm expert. I never thought that the divine King Duanmu would actually condense a golden core of laws. Doesn't that mean he's broken through the divine king realm and reached the primordial realm? A few over-gods said. They were not calm at all. No, the divine King Duanmu's golden core of laws is rather different. It said that the golden cores of primordial realm experts are extremely bright and dazzling, while the divine King Duanmu's golden core of laws is dim. It's even devoid of any golden light. Clearly, he's in the process of reaching the primordial realm from the divine king realm. He can only be described as having one foot in the primordial realm, while the other foot is still in the realm of the divine king, said Yongkai. All the over-gods were very unsettled. None of them had thought that the divine King Duanmu would actually have half a foot in the primordial realm. As long as he made it through this process and completely condensed his golden core of laws, he would become a true primordial realm expert. But very soon, everyone was overwhelmed by the temptation of the divine king's legacy. They all began to attack the power of laws that protected the divine king Duanmu's remains. So what if he was a half-step primordial realm expert? He was already dead. He had been reduced to a skeleton. The power of laws was very powerful, enough to shatter a low-quality saint artifact in a single instance. However, as long as they did not approach the power of laws would not be able to harm them, as they could already tell that the power of laws could only protect them. It would not actively attack them. The overgods all stood in the distance and sent out sword chi, or pillars of energy, to attack the power of laws. They wanted to whittle away the power of laws bit by bit. For a moment, terrifying ripples of energy swept through the surroundings as booms constantly rang out. In order to break through the protection of the power of laws, the overgods did not hold back at all. Fairy Haoyue, is there anything you need here? Jianqin did not attack the power of laws that protected the divine King Duanmu. Instead, he communicated with Fairy Haoyue. I never thought that Duanmu would have already broken through and condensed a golden core of laws. That has exceeded my expectations. What I need is right here. It's Duanmu's space ring. As a supreme divine king, it's impossible for his space ring to not have supreme grade divine crystals. There might even be 5-colored divine crystals. Moreover, there's still some energy in the remains that hasn't dispersed. It'll still be helpful to me. Jianqin, I need you to create an opportunity for me to approach Duanmu's remains. Fairy Haoyue's voice rang out in Jianqin's head. At this moment, there was a flash of golden light piercing the forehead of an overgod in a single instance. The early overgod died on the spot, wiping out his soul. After killing the first early overgod, the golden streak of light continued towards the second early overgod. However, the death of the first early overgod made everyone cautious. The second overgod immediately bellowed out as the power of laws surged. He directly swung his axe towards the golden light. Boom! Chapter 1758. All the overgods who surrounded God King Duanmu's power of laws stopped. They all stared at the golden sword that hovered in the air as they became rather stern. With just a single flying sword, he had killed an early overgod and sent a second early overgod flying while vomiting blood. Even the late overgods became rather fearful of his strength. More importantly, they had no idea where the golden flying sword had come from. Jianqin also stared at the flying sword. He frowned and became slightly doubtful. He thought, why does this sword seem so familiar? Which fellow launched a sneak attack? Why don't you show yourself? Yang Kai called out. Humph, what sneak attack? You make it sound so horrible. Bao Bao killed you fair and square, a rather young voice rang out. All the overgods present were stunned when they heard the voice. Afterwards, they all turned their heads and stared at the golden sword in surprise. The reason for that was because the voice was clearly coming from the golden flying sword. It was also at this moment that a little girl suddenly appeared on the golden sword. Her body was illusionary, and she only seemed to be 4 or 5 years old. She was delicate and extremely cute, but her eyes were currently wide open as she stared at the overgods furiously. It's actually the sword spirit. Is this sword God King Duanmu's treasure? Bing Lu asked in surprise. Jianqin came to a realization as well. He had found the sword to be rather familiar earlier. Wasn't it the sword that the divine king wielded? You have some insight. That's right. The divine king is Bao Bao's master. Since you're unwilling to submit to the laws of the world, you obviously don't have the right to receive master's legacy. Please leave immediately. If you continue to disturb the slumber of an overgod, don't blame Bao Bao for being impolite. Bao Bao will kill all of you, the sword spirit said coldly. Although she did not seem old, her childish voice was filled with killing intent. Clearly, the sword had been with the divine king for countless years already. As the divine king waged battles everywhere, it had naturally matured as well. Ha 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 ha. You want to threaten us with a flying sword? "What a joke!" a late overgod sneered. A late overgod sneered and directly charged towards the golden sword. He reached towards the hilt in an attempt to subdue the sword. The other overgods moved at the same time as well. They all charged towards the golden flying sword as quickly as they could. This was God King Duanmu's treasure. To them, it was a treasure that could protect the fortune of their clans and protect them. Jianqin, it's extremely likely that Duanmu's divine king's legacy is related to this flying sword. It might even be in the sword spirit's hands. If you want it, I'll take it for you once I recover my body, Fairy Haoyue's voice rang out. Fairy Haoyue, there's no hurry. Let's think of a way for you to approach the divine king's remains first, Jianqin said. He was not tempted at all. He had come to the divine king's dwelling this time mainly for Fairy Haoyue. He also wanted to find some treasures useful to his cultivation so that he could break through with the chaotic body as soon as possible. The divine king's legacy was just a few cultivation methods and battle skills. He cultivated the chaotic body, let alone the cultivation methods left behind by the divine king. Even the cultivation methods of some primordial realm experts would not be enough. He would not be tempted at all. Battle skills were passed down to him by the sword spirits. Many of the battle skills had been created by the previous master of the sword spirits. He even possessed the peak god tier sword technique, the profound sword chi, so he naturally would not take the divine king's sword technique seriously. On the other side, several dozen overgods had already begun fighting the golden flying sword. Although not all the overgods took part, close to 30 of them engaged in a fierce battle with the flying sword. The golden flying sword was controlled by the sword spirit, after all. If it was a one-on-one battle, she would not fear any one of them. However, she could only avoid close to 30 overgods. She shot through the surroundings as a streak of light, dodging everyone's attacks and counterattacking from time to time. However, anyone with a discerning eye could tell that the golden flying sword had completely lost the upper hand. It was completely dodging with its speed, dealing with close to 30 overgods. The shock waves from their battle are far too violent. I can't endure it as a soul. I need to find a way to stop their battle. Only then can I go outside, Fairy Haoyue said sternly. But the divine King Duanmu's corpse is protected by a powerful layer of laws. How are you going to get past that? Jianqin asked with a frown. I can pay a small price to temporarily suppress the power of laws, but I'll need 10 seconds. Jianqin became stern when he heard Fairy Haoyue's words. He knew what Fairy Haoyue meant. She wanted him to buy 10 seconds for her. She could not be injured at all during that time. After all, she was just far too fragile as a soul. Even an Origin Realm expert could injure her heavily, let alone overgods who are countless times more powerful than Origin Realm experts. Although 10 seconds was a short amount of time, he would have to endure the attacks of many overgods. The overgods who had come would never allow Fairy Haoyue to approach the divine King Duanmu's corpse. Jianqin looked around and discovered that there were still over a dozen overgods who had not taken part in the battle for the golden flying sword. At the same time, the battle between the overgods and the golden flying sword had produced extremely terrifying ripples of energy. Even gods would struggle to gain a foothold there. It was not beneficial for Fairy Haoyue's soul to move about in such an environment. At this moment, the golden flying sword turned into a streak of golden light and vanished from the space in a single instant. It had fled outside. Clearly, it was no longer the opponent of over 30 overgods. The overgods did not give up either. They all chased after it. The divine King Duanmu's corpse was protected by the power of laws anyway, so no one could enter it. As a result, they were not worried that someone would use this opportunity to steal the divine King Duanmu's space ring after they left. In the blink of an eye, only Jianqin and the overgods who had not taken part in the battle remained in the space. These people were all early overgods, so they knew that it would be very difficult for them to obtain the flying sword before mid or late overgods. As a result, They saved up some strength to conserve their energy and prepare for the final battle. A good chance. Genshin's eyes lit up. He knew that his chance had come, but he did not take action immediately. Instead, he said to the overgods of the divine kingdom of Pingtian secretly, Guhan Shui, Bing Lu, Feng Buell, I have something to discuss with you. Guhan Shui, Bing Lu, and Feng Buell were all early overgods, so they did not take part in the battle for the flying sword. Chapter 1759. Guhan Yan, Bing Lu, and Feng Buell all looked over when they heard Jianshin's message. They stared at Jianshin, who sat on the ground. Jianshin, feel free to tell us what you need to discuss with us. The hunchbacked Bing Lu smiled. Jianshin, what is it? Is it good or bad? Don't forget about me if it's something good, Guhan Yan chuckled. Guhan Yan giggled. From her tone, she seemed to be an old friend of Jianshin. Jianshin, tell us about it first. If it's within our abilities, we'll definitely assist you. Feng Buell replied as well. No one else knew about their conversation, but Bing Lu, Guhan Yan, and Feng Buell treated Jianshin rather politely. They did everything they could to befriend him. They did not want to miss out on any opportunity. In their opinion, Jianshin's cultivation was greatly lacking. If they really did fight, it would be impossible for him to defeat an early overgod with just the laws of the sword as an overgod. However, they knew even better that as long as Jianshin had some time, he would be able to recover his cultivation in an extremely short amount of time. Once his cultivation and comprehension of the laws of the sword reached the same level, there would be very few people who were his opponent at the same level of cultivation as him due to the strength of his laws of the sword. He might even become a second Ling Hogong, able to fight mid-overgods to a draw with his laws of the sword as an early overgod. If Jianshin's terrifying sword chi, which could instantly kill early overgods, even mid-overgods might not be Jianshin's opponent. Bing Lu, Guhan Yan, and Guhan Yan would naturally try their best to befriend such an expert. They all believed that even if they could not become friends, it would be best if they did not become enemies. After a moment of thought, Jianshin said secretly, Bing Lu, Guhan Shui, Feng Buell, I hope you can help me keep the 3 early overgods busy as much as possible. Jianshin had found the 3 of them because he trusted them the most. Although there were a few other overgods who wanted to befriend him, Jianshin did not trust them, even if some of them came from the royal capital of the divine kingdom of Pingtian. Jianshin did not dare to trust Yang Kai, who was a late overgod. Yang Kai was just too powerful, so he was even more worried. Keep the 3 early overgods busy? Jianshin, what are you trying to do? Guhan Shui asked in surprise. You'll naturally understand what I'm trying to do later. Anyway, it's extremely likely that the overgods here will attack me. You just need to keep the 3 overgods busy for a few seconds. In return, I'll give each of you a soul recovery pill, said Jianshin said. What? A soul recovery pill? Bing Lu, Guhan Yan, and Feng Buell were all surprised when they heard about the soul recovery pill. Disbelief filled their faces. The soul recovery pill was an extremely precious pill. Just a single one could fully recover the power of an early overgod soul in a few seconds. It was extremely valuable, and it was impossible to buy it in the divine kingdom of Pingtian. Aside from the soul recovery pill, I'll give each of you 2 droplets of stalactite. Moreover, Jianshin, will owe you a favor. All you need to do is keep the 3 early overgods busy for a few seconds, said Jian Wushuang. In order to help Fairy Haoyue approach the divine king's corpse, Jianshin was willing to pay any price. All right, we agree. We'll keep the 3 overgods busy for a few seconds, but there's nothing we can do for the other overgods. After hesitating slightly, Bing Lu, Feng Buell, and Guhan Yan agreed. Although they could vaguely guess that Jianshin probably wanted the divine king's corpse, they did not think too much about it. They understood that it was impossible for them to obtain the wealth and legacies in the divine king's space ring. Even if they stopped Jianshin from obtaining them, they would still end up in the hands of the late over-gods in the end. It would be very difficult for them to obtain anything with their strength as early over-gods. If that were the case, it would be better for them to agree to Genshin's suggestion. Not only would they be able to improve their relationship with Genshin, but they would also be able to obtain some benefits from Genshin. Of course, what they truly valued was the favor they owed Genshin. Genshin was extremely straightforward as well. He gave the three of them the soul recovery pills and the stalactites on the spot. Genshin had obtained a total of 10 soul recovery pills. He gave one to Ando Fu and Emo Ling each, while he and Shun Jian each took 4 of the remaining 8. He had already consumed 2 of the 4 pills earlier, so he only had 2 left. As a result, he took 2 from Shun Jian out of the soul recovery pills that he had given to Gohan, and Emo Ling. He kept the remaining one as a backup. Although Genshin could kill 6 early over-gods with his profound sword chi if he used the 3 soul recovery pills well. The soul recovery pills required time to recover the power of the soul. Genshin would not have enough time to recover in the upcoming battle. However, he needed Gohan Yen, and Guhan Yen to keep the 3 over-gods busy. That would reduce the pressure on him. He only had soul recovery pills on him that could tempt over-gods. As for the other pills, although they were quite valuable as well, they were nothing to over-gods. In order to help Fairy Haoyue condense a body successfully, Genshin had invested quite a lot. So what if I lose a few soul recovery pills? Once Fairy Haoyue enters successfully and obtains the divine King Duanmu's space ring, I'll be able to recoup my losses 1,000 times over. At the same time, I might be able to break through successfully with my chaotic body, Genshin thought as he comforted himself. The over-gods who chased after the golden sword could return at any time, so Genshin did not dare to waste any more time. He immediately released the bright moon divine hall from his space ring. As the doors opened, Fairy Haoyue's illusionary figure slowly made her way out. Shen Jian walked out with her. The remaining over-gods naturally noticed Genshin's actions as well, but they did not pay too much attention to him. Genshin immediately put the bright moon divine hall away as well. However, as soon as he put it away, Fairy Haoyue's figure suddenly moved. She directly charged towards the power of laws that protected the divine King Duanmu. She's just a soul, yet she dares to covet what belongs to the divine King Duanmu. How reckless! Aside from Guhan Yen, and Guhan Yen, the other over-gods all sneered disdainfully. However, what happened next left them dumbfounded. When Fairy Haoyue approached the power of laws, she was not directly slain by the power as they had expected. Instead, her illusionary soul became extraordinarily bright at that moment, shining with white light. The light was like a white flame that burned Fairy Haoyue's soul, causing it to dim at a visible rate. Her soul was enveloped by the flame-like light, slowly fusing with the power of laws. All the power of laws that approached Fairy Ha shook gently before retreating slowly, as if they were afraid of approaching her at all. As for this shaking, it was only a scene that outsiders could see. In truth, this layer of law power was trembling in fear. At that moment, none of the over-gods sensed an unimaginably tremendous, terrifying pressure radiating from Fairy Haoyue. However, under Fairy Haoyue's precise control, the pressure crushed towards the power of laws. This pressure seemed to have turned into the might of the heavens, completely overriding the power of the rules, causing the power of the rules to retreat. Chapter 1760. Not only were all the over-gods stunned as they watched Fairy Haoyue slowly enter the power of laws, but even Gohan, Binglu, and Feng Buell narrowed their eyes in disbelief. The layer of power that protected the Divine King's remains was at the level of a half-step primordial realm expert. Although the power of laws would not actively attack and could only protect, it did not mean that the power of laws could be approached so easily. If the power of laws approached, even most divine kings would become injured, let alone over-gods. This was because the power of laws had surpassed the level of the Divine King. It was at the level of a half-step primordial realm expert. However, not only did Fairy Hauyu not disintegrate when she approached the power of laws as a soul, but she even gradually fused with it. From the looks of it, it was very likely for her to pass through the power of laws. Naturally, all the overgods present were shocked by this. Jianchen, who is she? Guhan's voice rang out in Jianchen's head. Her voice was filled with shock. Who she is isn't important, but I can tell you that she's a supreme expert. Jianchen replied to Bing Lu, Fengbiul, and Fengbiul. The expressions of Bing Lu, Guhan, and Fengbiul all changed when they heard that. At the same time, a pill appeared in Xin Jian's hand. They had obtained this pill from the pill room of the Divine King's disciples' dwelling. It was called the Fire Cloud Pill, and it could temporarily increase one's cultivation by a minor level, ignoring the restrictions of the laws of the world. However, the price of consuming the pill was extremely great. No one would be willing to touch the Fire Cloud Pill unless it was a matter of life and death. Xin Jian ingested the Fire Cloud Pill without any hesitation. As soon as the pill reached his stomach, a powerful presence immediately radiated from Xin Jian. His cultivation skyrocketed at that moment, going from early god to mid-god in the blink of an eye. A Fire Cloud Pill appeared in Jianchen's hand as well. He thought, I hope the Fire Cloud Pill is effective on chaotic force as well. Afterwards, Jianchen ingested the Fire Cloud Pill without any hesitation. At that moment, he felt like his chaotic force was about to boil. Although his chaotic force had not reached the 10th layer, Jianchen could clearly sense that it flowed even more violently. It felt like it had gone berserk, and its power had clearly increased. Although the Fire Cloud Pill was good stuff, the price of consuming it was just too great. As a result, he did not give it to Guhan Yen and the others. Even if he did give it to them, they would not consume it right now. Oh no, the soul wants to take away what belongs to the Divine King. Stop her. Don't let her succeed. When Shen Jian and Jianchen ingested the Fire Cloud Pills, the overgods all returned to their senses. Light flickered through their eyes as they charged towards Fairy Haoyue without any hesitation. Two of them even waved their hands and sent powerful origin energy towards Fairy Haoyue. Bing Lu, Yu Fengyan, Fengbiul, do it quick. You're assisting a peak expert. Once she reconstructs her body, you'll definitely benefit greatly. Jianchen said to Bing Lu and the others in a hurry. He arrived before Fairy Haoyue in a flash, using his body as a shield to protect Fairy Haoyue. At the same time, the flying snow sword appeared in his hand. He radiated with a soaring sword intent as he unleashed his comprehension of the laws of the sword spirit realm without holding back at all. He slashed out two powerful sword chis to disperse the incoming origin energy. Boom! The sword chi collided with the two strands of origin energy, erupting with powerful ripples of energy that wreaked havoc in all directions. Jianchen's feet seemed to be rooted to the ground as he stood there like a mountain. His body had turned into a tough shield. The powerful ripples of energy struck Jianchen. But Fairy Haoyue, who stood behind Jianchen, was naturally unaffected. At the same time, Bing Lu, Guhan Yen, and Fengbiul moved as well. They gritted their teeth and charged towards the overgods, keeping 3 of them busy. Aside from Jianchen, there were a total of 14 overgods gathered there. Fengbiul, Bing Lu, and Guhan Yen kept 3 overgods busy, so there were 8 overgods left. The 8 overgods all charged towards Jianchen, who protected Fairy Haoyue at that moment. All of them radiated with killing intent as their presences surged. Even though they feared Jianchen slightly, this fear had completely vanished before the divine King Duanmu's legacy. A will that splits the heavens, sword shakes, star shatters. Xin Jian bellowed out, and a cloud stream sword in his hand produced a ripple that rapidly expanded towards 2 of the overgods. Xin Jian's comprehension of the laws of the sword was at the great perfection of sword origin, which was equivalent to peak god. His cultivation had also risen from early god to mid-god under the amplification of the fire cloud pill, and the laws of the sword were one of the laws with the greatest offensive power. With such strength, it was enough to kill regular late gods, even if it did not pose a threat to early overgods. It was enough to make them take him seriously. This was because, apart from Ling Hogong, the laws that the other overgods comprehended were slightly weaker than the laws of the sword. Ling Hogong relied on the power of the laws of the sword to challenge those at a higher level of cultivation. He was able to fight mid-overgods to a stalemate even as an early overgod, let alone Xin Jian. The two early overgods' faces turned cold when they saw Xin Jian's ripple of energy. The ripple of energy was not enough to threaten them. It was only enough to make them take him seriously. Humph! A mere god dares to challenge an overgod. Your courage is praiseworthy, but you're just looking to die. The two early overgods sneered. They directly struck out with their hands, and origin energy and the power of laws surged, dispersing Xin Jian's ripple of energy. Afterwards, the two gods changed their direction of advance. They no longer charged towards Jianqin. Their eyes were cold as they charged toward Xin Jian with heavy killing intent. Xin Jian became extremely stern. Without a doubt, dealing with two overgods with his current strength was a great challenge. Fortunately, he only needed to last for 10 seconds. A will that splits the heavens, illusion of the sword finger. Suddenly, Shen Jian bellowed out. Specks of starlight suddenly flickered in his surroundings, forming an illusionary galaxy that radiated with a boundless presence. He seemed to have fused with the galaxy, becoming the god of the illusionary galaxy. As he stabbed out with his cloud-stream sword, the tremendous power of the galaxy immediately surged out. It collided with the two overgods with a boundless and ancient presence. The two early overgods became rather stern when they faced the power of the galaxy. At that moment, they actually sensed a sliver of threat at the same time, which left them extremely shocked. After all, they were facing a god right now. On the other side, Jianqin stood with the flying snow sword in his hand. A damaged set of armor had appeared on him. Chapter 1761. Jianqin, don't even think about taking the divine King Duanmu's legacy for yourself. Jianqin, move, or you'll die a horrible death today, the 6 early overgods who charged towards Jianqin called out coldly. They were all brimming with killing intent. Before they had even arrived, they had already sent strands of powerful energy towards Jianqin. Jianqin's damaged armor covered less than a third of his body. His robes fluttered without any wind, and his black hair danced wildly. A shocking sword intent radiated from him. The sword intent was so powerful that even the 6 overgods became stern. Sky-severing strike. Jianqin called out. He raised the flying snow sword above his head, and immediately a huge streak of light that was several hundred meters long condensed. With the fluttering snow in the air, the huge streak of light directly slashed down. As they swung down, the surrounding space seemed to freeze at that moment, forming a sword domain that enveloped the attacks from the 6 overgods. Boom! The 2 attacks collided and erupted with a great boom. The sword chi dispersed at the same time as the attacks from the 6 overgods. Terrifying ripples of energy shot out in all directions with the scattered sword chi, sweeping through the surroundings. Jianqin's body shook violently, and his face paled slightly. His organs churned like they were in a mess. However, his body remained straight like a tough shield, standing there without moving at all. He blocked the ripples of energy from up ahead and protected Fairy Haiyue. At the same time, 2 strands of profound sword chi appeared above his head. They shone with dazzling light as they surged into the sky, giving off a terrifying pressure. As soon as the profound sword chi appeared, the expressions of the 6 overgods who attacked Jianqin immediately changed. A smear of fear and deep fear appeared in their eyes. They had all personally witnessed the power of the profound sword chi. It could easily kill early overgods. Back off if you don't want to die, or don't blame me for being merciless, Genshin bellowed out as his presence surged. He seemed like he could hold off 10,000 enemies all by himself. 2 seconds had already passed. The 6 overgods all looked at one another and hesitated. What's there to be afraid of? There are 6 of us. His secret technique is powerful, but I refuse to believe we can't stop him if we work together. Let's go together. Finally, the 6 overgods no longer hesitated after one of the early overgods called out coldly. They gathered together and looked after one another as they charged towards Genshin quickly. A cold light flashed through Genshin's eyes. With a thought, the strand of profound sword chi above his head immediately turned into a streak of white light, shooting out with lightning speed towards one of the overgods. The moment the profound sword chi shot out, the 6 overgods all came to a halt. They used their full strength to fend off the profound sword chi. Origin energy pulsed around them as the power of laws condensed into sharp swords. The profound sword chi was extremely powerful. However, the profound sword chi was just too fast, so fast that it had basically surpassed their reaction time. Even though they were already moving very quickly, they were nowhere near as fast as the profound sword chi. Before their attacks had even come into contact with the profound sword chi, the profound sword chi had already arrived before the forehead of one of the overgods. Spurt! Blood splattered as a bloody mark appeared on the forehead of one of the overgods. The profound sword chi had stabbed into the overgod's forehead without any obstructions, wiping out his soul. The attacks of the 5 other overgods struck Genshin at the same time after failing to block the profound sword chi. Genshin shuddered as blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. For vicious wounds had appeared on his body as blood dyed his white robes red. As for the 5th attack, it landed on the damaged armor. The armor really was a god artifact, after all. Even though it was heavily damaged, it was extremely tough. It did not even leave behind a single mark after taking on an overgod's attack. However, the powerful force of the attack did not decrease at all when it struck Genshin. Genshin finally could not help but take a step back. However, the force of the impact from the armor was just too great. Clearly, a single step was not enough to disperse the force. Just when he was about to take a second step back, he suddenly gritted his teeth and stabbed the flying snow sword into the ground, forcefully stopping himself. However, this action made his wounds even worse. He vomited blood as soon as he opened his mouth. He could not retreat. If he took another step back, he would collide with Fairy Haoyue's soul. Genshin wiped away the blood from the corner of his mouth. Even though he was heavily injured, he did not seem weak at all. With a flip of his hand, he pulled out the 7th grade truth tear pill of revival he had obtained from the alchemy room and swallowed it along with a soul recovery pill. As the pill entered his stomach, his wounds immediately began to heal rapidly. Even his soul, which had been depleted from using the profound sword chi, began to recover rapidly as the effects of the soul recovery pill spread. At the same time, chaotic force circulated wildly within Genshin. He pushed the advantage of the chaotic body to the limit, using every moment to heal as quickly as possible. Under the dual effects of the chaotic force and the healing pills, Genshin's wounds immediately healed at an extremely shocking rate. It was so fast that any of the overgods present would have become utterly dumbfounded if they had seen it. Now 5 breaths had passed. By highest firmament. At this moment, a bellow rang out. One of the 5 overgods began to use a truth tier battle skill. An ocean appeared behind him, as if it had fused with the surroundings. It swept towards Genshin with all the energy in the surroundings. Vulcan's finger. Another overgod began to use a battle skill. Flames surged from his body, condensing into a huge hand that extended towards Genshin. Lightless darkness. Palm of destruction. Death's soul-reaping slash. The 5 overgods all used truth tier battle skills. A terrifying pressure permeated the surroundings as 5 terrifying attacks swept towards Jianqin with devastating power. Jianqin became extremely stern. With a thought, he sent out a second strand of profound sword qi, which collided with the battle skills of the 5 overgods. The profound sword qi turned into a bolt of lightning and collided with the first strand of sword qi in a single moment. With a boom, the first battle skill was destroyed without any suspense, but the profound sword qi did not slow down at all. It continued to shoot towards the second, third, fourth, and fifth battle skills with surging sword qi. Boom! 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 With a series of booms, the battle skills from the 5 overgods were all destroyed by the profound sword qi. However, the profound sword qi did not disperse. It flickered with a dim light as it directly charged towards an overgod like a fearless warrior. The overgod was extremely stern. He immediately bellowed out as his energy surged out. He wielded a huge scythe and used the power of laws to strike the profound sword qi as hard as he could. Clearly, he had put his life on the line to unleash that attack. Chapter 1762. After destroying the battle skills of 5 overgods, the profound sword qi had become much weaker. It no longer possessed the might it possessed in its peak state. In the end, it shattered under the scythe, dispersing as strands of sword qi. Due to inertia, the scattered strands of profound sword qi shot towards the early overgod with the sickle. Caught off guard, the early overgod was turned into a beehive by the strands of sword qi. Every single strand of sword qi pierced his body easily, riddling him with holes in a single moment. Moreover, the power of the laws of the sword lingered in the wounds, constantly destroying his body, causing his wounds to worsen. The overgod grunted and retreated from the battle with his sickle. He was already heavily injured, so he could no longer fight. Jianqin had used up all the power of his soul after shooting out the 2 strands of profound sword qi. His head felt heavy as he experienced waves of dizziness. However, as the medicinal effects of the mind recovery pill took effect, his depleted yuan spirit power immediately began to replenish rapidly. 7 seconds had passed. Kill! The 4 remaining overgods all went mad. They basically charged towards Jianqin with bloodshot eyes because they saw that most of Fairy Haiyue's body had already fused with the power of laws that protected the divine, King Duanmu's remains. Jianqin's body began to recede rapidly. His mind cleared up once again. Even though the power of his soul had been replenished, it was clearly not enough for him to use a 3rd strand of profound sword qi in just a few seconds. Daluo sword! Jianqin called out. He formed a seal with his hand, and the flying snow sword immediately flickered with golden light. A strand of golden sword qi condensed around the flying snow sword. As he swung the sword, the golden sword qi shot out with a swish, colliding with the sword of one of the overgods. The Daluo sword qi dispersed as well, while the early overgod who had received the sword qi came to a halt. He staggered a few steps back uncontrollably. The other 3 overgods had already arrived before Jianqin. One of them used a huge hammer, swinging it towards Jianqin's chest. The other 2 all used swords without any exception. They stabbed out with the laws of fire and the laws of darkness. The sword of fire stabbed towards Jianqin, while the sword of darkness stabbed past Jianqin, directly towards Fairy Haiyue behind Jianqin. Jianqin's eyes suddenly narrowed when he saw the sword that stabbed towards Fairy Haiyue. Afterwards, he roared out furiously as his gaze became extremely shocking. At the same time, specks of red light actually appeared in his eyes. This was a sign that he was about to lose his mind. His main mission was to protect Fairy Haiyue for 10 seconds. No matter how great the danger was during that time, he could not dodge, nor could he retreat. He had to face it head-on. The sword had already stabbed towards Fairy Haiyue. Fairy Haiyue was in danger. In that critical moment, Jianqin extended his left hand. Chaotic force coiled around his hand as well as a layer of silver-white light. He directly used his hand to grab the sword that stabbed towards Fairy Hauyue. At the same time, he placed the flying snow sword before him, blocking the hammer that was hurtling towards his chest. Spurt! The sword with the laws of fire stabbed into Genshin. It pierced through Genshin's body. Droplets of immature, chaotic blood dripped from the sharp tip of the sword. Every droplet of blood was quite powerful, enough to directly kill a few weaker receival experts. The hand that Genshin used to grab Fairy Hauyue's sword was also covered in blood. His flesh had been ripped apart, revealing his white bones. Fortunately, Genshin managed to grab the sword with the laws of darkness firmly, preventing it from harming Fairy Hauyue. His body stood in front of Fairy Hauyue like a tough shield, blocking all the shockwaves. 8 seconds had passed. At this moment, the 3 overgods had already arrived before Genshin. They were no weaker than Genshin in the first place, let alone the fact that it was 3 against 1. Genshin struggled to fend off all of them, and he also had to protect Fairy Hauyue. The red light in Genshin's eyes became brighter and brighter. The world before Genshin slowly became blood red. Genshin also knew that he was about to lose his mind, but there was nothing he could do right now. As he watched Fairy Hauyue emerge with the power of laws successfully, a sliver of determination suddenly appeared in his eyes. He called out, "Explode, flying snow sword!" With a deafening boom, the flying snow sword exploded in a dazzling white light. Along with it, the laws of the sword and strands of chaotic force that enveloped the flying snow sword exploded as well. Immediately, a terrifying shockwave of energy with the power of the laws of the sword and chaotic force dispersed into the surroundings. It immediately pushed the 3 early overgods far away. Genshin pulled out the spear he had obtained from killing the skinny overgod from his space ring. He held the spear with one hand and directly stabbed it deeply into the ground. He used the spear to stabilize himself. The terrifying shockwaves from the explosion of the flying snow sword landed on Genshin. Due to the support of the spear, Genshin stood where he was like a mountain. He endured the storm-like shockwaves without taking a single step back. However, he paid a huge price as well. His wounds became even more severe, and he vomited mouthfuls of blood. His face was sheet white. 9 seconds had already passed. The 3 early gods stabilized themselves very soon. Before the ripples of energy could settle down, the 3 of them charged towards Genshin again while enduring the storm of energy. Genshin stared at the 3 of them firmly. At this moment, his consciousness had become rather blurry. The world he saw was gradually filled with blood. In the final second, the bloody Genshin suddenly charged towards the 3 early overgods. He spread his arms and grabbed the swords of the 2 early overgods with his hands. He used the damaged armor to forcefully endure the attack from the hammer. Bang! With a thud, Genshin was blown far away by the hammer. As he flew back, he constantly vomited blood. He was extremely heavily injured. Quick, kill that soul! The 3 overgods immediately charged towards Fairy Hauyue after sending Genshin flying. Their gazes were cold. However, it was also at this moment that Fairy Hauyue's illusionary soul completely submerged into the power of laws, vanishing from the 3 overgods' vision. Only a cold, murderous voice rang out. "If you dare to kill the 2 of them, I'll definitely wipe out your entire clan once I recover my strength. Even if I have to flee to the ends of the world, I'll hunt you down. Even the divine king of your divine kingdom won't be able to protect you." The expressions of the 3 early overgods changed again and again when they heard that. Even the divine king could not protect them. Did the soul possess the strength of the divine king when she was still alive, or had she surpassed the divine king? On the other side, Shun Jian was covered in blood as well. He collapsed on the ground, heavily injured. Although the 2 early overgods who fought against him were not injured, they seemed to be in a rather horrible shape. Their clothes had been ripped apart by sword chi. Chapter 1763. The eyes of the two early over-gods that Xinjian had kept busy turned cold. They cursed resentfully, God damn it. That's because we're two mighty over-gods. Yet we've been kept busy by God for so long, allowing the soul to approach Duanmu, Divine King's corpse. Just a mere god has actually made us lose our opportunity to obtain Duanmu, Divine King's legacy. That's unforgivable. The other over-god in tattered clothes said coldly as well, He's made us lose our opportunity to obtain Duanmu, Divine King's legacy. This god's sins are so great that even if we kill him, we won't be able to make up for it. I want him to suffer a fate worse than death. The faces of the two over-gods who had been kept busy by Shenzhen for 10 seconds were sunken. Their eyes were filled with heavy killing intent. They were two mighty early over-gods. Whether it be in terms of cultivation or comprehension, they possessed an absolute advantage, yet it took them so much effort to kill a god. Moreover, they were reduced to such horrible shapes. They felt utterly humiliated, so their killing intent towards Xinjian was extremely intense. As for Fairy Haoyu's threat, they directly ignored it. Although the threat from a frail soul had indeed shocked them, they were not naive enough to believe that Fairy Haoyu would actually possess such strength in the future. At this moment, Jianqin climbed up from the ground as well. He clung onto the final sliver of clarity in his head and arrived before Xinjian as quickly as he could. He directly lifted up the heavily injured Xinjian, who could not even stand up. At the same time, he formed a seal with his hands. Linear lightning release. As soon as he completed the seal, Jianqin became enveloped by a bright, white light. He turned into a bolt of lightning and shot towards the entrance with unbelievable speed. In just a single instant, he arrived before the entrance at a speed that completely surpassed that of lightning. He was about to flee. The eyes of the early over-gods all narrowed. They stared at Jianqin, who had fled to the entrance in a single instant in shock. However, without any exception, none of them could do anything about it. With Jianqin's terrifying speed, even they were unable to stop him. What astonishing speed! Even the laws of wind pales in comparison. An over-god exclaimed in surprise. An over-god sighed in amazement. He had never seen someone move so quickly in his life. As a matter of fact, Jianqin and Xinjian's bodies had even elongated as they flew, as if they had turned into two streaks of light. After Jianqin's laws of the sword reached sword spirit, his speed naturally increased by a lot when he used the linear lightning release. However, at this moment, a burly man suddenly appeared at the entrance. Dejected, his face was filled with regret and regret. Clearly, he had just entered the entrance of the entrance. The burly man was not weak either. To no surprise, he was a mid-over-god. Clearly, he was one of the over-gods who had left in pursuit of the golden sword. As soon as the burly man entered the third hut, Jianqin, who had used the linear lightning release to flee, just happened to collide with the burly man. Bang! When the two collided, a muffled sound rang out, and a shockwave visible to the naked eye spread out in all directions. Jianqin was knocked back, and the terrifying speed from the linear lightning release suddenly vanished. He immediately felt like all his bones were about to fall apart from the collision. Excruciating pain filled his entire body, and his organs were shattered. Blood spurted from his mouth in large mouthfuls. Caught off guard, the burly man staggered backwards from Jianqin's collision. He left behind a deep footprint on the ground with each step. In the end, he stumbled and fell on his bottom. His face was flushed, and his organs were in turmoil from Jianqin's collision. Which bastard hit me? The burly man leapt to his feet and bellowed out. His face was pale, and he was utterly furious. He had just entered the hut, and before he could even see what was going on, he had been knocked to the ground. Naturally, he was furious. However, he had no idea that his sudden intrusion had cut off Jianqin's hopes of escaping, forcing Jianqin back into a corner. Jianqin, who had collided with the burly man, became even more injured as a result. Afterwards, various over-gods entered the hut as well. They were all rather dejected and filled with great reluctance. These people were all experts who had fought for the flying swords. They had all returned now, and many of them were covered in blood. Their faces were abnormally pale. They were all injured. Jianshin's eyes became gloomy when he saw this. He sighed inside. He knew that he was done for this time. As soon as he thought of that, his eyes became completely blood-red. His last sliver of consciousness that he had been holding on to vanished as well. He had completely lost his mind. However, his injuries were just too severe. The moment he lost his mind, his head tilted to the side and he fainted. To the side, Shen Jian had also fainted. Jianshin had used the linear lightning release to strike the burly man with extremely great speed. The powerful force of impact had also caused his injuries to worsen. If it were not for the fact that the two of them had already become gods, just the force of the collision probably would have been enough to shatter them. They would have been reduced to a pile of mush. The return of the over-gods caused the expressions of Guhan, Binglu, and Fengbuel to change. Without any hesitation, they immediately fled towards the exit. Jianshin had assisted Fairy Haoyue in passing through the power of laws and approaching the divine king Duanmu's remains. Without a doubt, he had become the public enemy here. The three of them had become his accomplices as well. If they continued to remain here, they would not end up well. Don't let them escape. Stop them. An early over-god called out as soon as the three of them fled. His eyes were filled with intense hatred. Guhan, Binglu, and Fengbuel fled very quickly. They shot towards the exit with lightning speed. Along the way, Guhan and Fengbuel extended their hands towards Jianshin and Xinjian. They wanted to take the two of them with them. However, the two early over-gods that Xinjian had been busy with earlier took action. They stopped Fengbuel and Guhan. At the same time, the burly man who had been knocked to the ground by Jianshin looked over coldly. The burly man was a mid-over-god. His gaze immediately made Guhan and Feng Yixiao's hearts skip a beat. They no longer cared about Jianshin and Xinjian, immediately charging out without any hesitation. The over-gods who had fought against Xinjian and Jianshin before immediately pursued them. At the same time, they called out for the over-gods who had returned later to stop Guhan, Fengbuel, and Fengbuel. However, the over-gods who had returned later had no idea what had happened. Moreover, the people who had called out were only early over-gods. It was impossible for early over-gods to persuade them. Naturally, they did not do anything. In the end, the three of them managed to escape successfully. God damn it! Why did we let the three of them go? They're a group. They assisted a soul pass through the power of laws. They've probably obtained what belongs to the divine king by now. An early over-god who had fought against Xinjian said resentfully, "What did you say?" Someone passed through the powerful power of laws and approached the divine king Duanmu's remains? The expressions of the over-gods who had returned later changed drastically when they heard that. They all cried out as they glared at the person who had spoken.